for the inquiry to resume. Can I just check that everybody can hear me? Looks like it. And is the live stream working? I've got a thumbs up from the back there. Thank you very much. Just the usual reminder to everyone, if you can make sure that any electronic devices, laptops, phones, etc., switch to silent, please. I've got a few procedural matters to deal with before I ask the applicant to introduce their witness for today. In terms of the programme, as was agreed yesterday, we were expecting Mr. Whitby on first. I'm assuming the gentleman in the middle is Mr. Whitby. That's good. And for the avoidance of doubt, there was a bit of an exchange yesterday about when the applicant would be calling Mr. Sensical, and our understanding is that he wouldn't be called until tomorrow morning. Is that correct, Mr. Cameron?
Yes, sir, that's our preference, and having spoken to Mr. Parker, it seems that if we start at 9:30 tomorrow morning, we'll easily get through within the time allowed. We've given an estimate of 2 hours in chief, which is our consistent estimate throughout. And on the basis of that estimate, I understand from Mr. Parker that he doesn't have a concern about finishing tomorrow if we start at 9:30. But he can confirm or deny.
Yeah, and we've got you down for cross-examination, but for an hour then, Mr. Parker, is that?
Yes, I think that's what there is the issue of the emerging plan, which has cropped up during the inquiry. I think I might be slightly longer than an hour, but being as pessimistic and having regard to my inability to produce accurate time estimates, I mean, 2 hours at the very most, but even in those circumstances, I'd hope that would leave us comfortably within the time allowed.
Okay, thank you. Also, just for clarity, yesterday when we were talking about programming, it was mentioned that a Councillor Rees may want to speak. It's since been confirmed that he won't be speaking. In terms of the site visits, the applicant has prepared an itinerary for the accompanied site visits on the next Tuesday. So I'm grateful for that, and that's confirmed, and that's on the website. In terms of documents, we've had a request from Mrs. Burford. You'll recall that Mr. Burford asked some questions of Mr. Saunders yesterday to provide a document. However, myself and Mr. Clegg considered that as there was an extensive exchange between Mr. Burford and Mr. Saunders yesterday, and the two parties' respective positions are well understood by the panel, that the addition of a document in light of yesterday's exchange is not necessary. There are some other documents. We're aware that a statement of common ground between Cadent Gas and the applicant has been provided, which is helpful to understand the position between the parties there, and that's on the website. So myself and Mr. Clegg are minded to accept that. We've received a highways boundary plan, which I understand has been agreed by both Coton Parish Council, CPBF and the applicant, and that's been put on the website. However, it is quite difficult to read, particularly in terms of the underlying OS data from the overlay. So myself and Mr. Clegg would appreciate if we could actually have a couple of copies of those plans, hard copies, sort of full size, so that we can actually have a proper look at those, and also we could take those out on site with us as necessary. So that's a request to the applicant, if that
yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. And yeah, obviously I don't know whether we're going to refer to them today or not, but it'd be helpful if we could have hard copies in advance of next Wednesday at the latest, if that's doable. Thank you.
Well, we're not intending to refer to those maps today. Don't think we're going to need to.
I think we've had the examination of the evidence related
yes.
to those maps before. It's more a case of it'd be helpful if we got a copy when we go out on site.
That's noted, sir.
Thank you. When that came in, there was also a short statement provided by Mr. Parker, which I think it was just explaining what the CPPF CPC's case was, which I don't think myself and Mr. Clegg are too concerned about. But I was going to ask the applicant, have you got any comments about that statement?
Well, you didn't ask for it, sir, but we don't have any objection to it going in. If they want to put it in, fine.
Thank you. In that case, I can confirm to Mrs. Vincent that we'll be prepared to add that note alongside the plan on the website.
I'm grateful. I'd understood there was an objection to it, which is why we wrote in the terms we did. But if that's now been withdrawn, then that's fine. I just want to make clear, I know you've accepted it in, that's fine, just for the absolute doubt. I've obviously explained orally how the lines came to be drawn. I think that was partly misleading, and so this note then clarifies exactly what the position was. So I just wanted to make sure that you weren't being misled by anything that I had said to you previously. So as long as, I hope that's clear.
And it's been accepted as a statement from yourself or from your clients, Mr. Parker, as to what your position is, and that's what we've accepted it as.
Exactly that, sir. Our initial objection was because we thought we were being asked to agree it. We can't agree it because we don't know the details, but we don't object to it going in. But I don't think we need to spend any more time on it.
Thank you. In terms of other things that have come in, Mr. Parker, we've received a journal article relating to bat hopovers, and my understanding it was published on the 23rd of October, which obviously was after Ms. Reason and Mr. Woodfield's evidence. Can I just check? Is that something you're still wanting to submit, Mr. Parker?
Yes. We think it's important that you have the latest scientific evidence, and it's a report which deals specifically, at least in part, with the efficacy of bat hopovers for Barbastelle bats. In terms of how it should come forward to you, we've obviously written to you and asked you to accept the journal article. The only other possibility that occurs to me is to try and be helpful to you, and if you were minded to accept it and subject to any views, of course, from the applicant, whether we might work towards producing a very brief cover sheet for it, whereby both Mr. Woodfield and Miss Reason can, in neutral terms, highlight what the journal article says, so you don't have to trawl through the entirety of the journal article. But yes, we do ask you to accept that journal article in, because there was discussion and debate between the witnesses as to what scientific evidence was available to support the assertion that bat hopovers would be effective for Barbastelle bats, and this is the latest scientific evidence in respect of that issue. So yes, we do say that you should admit it in. Obviously, it's only been published very recently, so no party can be criticised for not providing it to you sooner.
And just in terms of that, I mean, obviously it was, it has been out for at least a couple of weeks. Is there a reason why it didn't come in any sooner?
I don't think so. I would need to go through my emails as to when I was first, when Mr. Woodfield first became aware of it. I think there was some discussion about whether it should go in, and then some discussion about the terms under which it should go in. So I think there was, as it were, some internal debate about the proper approach to take, but I can give you some more specific detail on that on instruction, if that's what you would like.
No, what I'll do now is ask the applicant's views on that on that journal, and also the suggestion from Mr. Parker that actually your two respective witnesses could sort of agree a covering note to sort of focus on any particular particular aspects.
So deal with the timing first of all. Published on the 23rd of October, we accept that. No reason for us to disbelieve that. But two and a bit weeks later, it's now been presented to the inquiry in the last week of the evidence. That causes us concern, the delay. If you're to accept it in, you'd have to think, do you need it? You've heard quite a bit of evidence on this already, so is it actually going to assist you in dealing with the particular issue, given you've heard quite a lot already and read quite a lot on it? If you think it is going to assist you, then we need the opportunity to comment on it in writing, and having fully understood what reliance is being placed on it by CPPF first. So it's not some agreed cover note is not the solution here, because it's clearly intended to be leveraged to advance the point that seems to be made by CPPF earlier, which Ms Reason's already responded to, which is that they don't think the hopovers are going to be effective, notwithstanding the agreement on Reg 63. So the proper course, if you think it would assist you and if you think it's justified to come in, is that we understand precisely which parts of the paper CPPF rely on, and we need that essentially today. And then Ms Reason can respond to you in writing on that, and we'll do that this week so that it's all done and dusted before we get to closing next week. But it would have to be in that order, and it would have to be in those timeframes because of where we are in the inquiry process.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Mr. Parker?
Well, yes, I would firmly resist the suggestion that this should be, as it were, a submission by CPPF and then a response and a final word on the part of Ms Reason. That gives rise to the significant possibility that Ms Reason will say things that we will want to comment on. This is not an opportunity for Ms Reason to bolster her evidence in respect of this issue. The issue has been fully canvassed, and there's no need for anyone to ask questions or to give any further views on it. The findings in the journal speak for themselves, and so what we would want you to do is simply accept the journal article in. The purpose of any cover note would simply to make your lives easier by pointing out what aspects of the journal article, which with respect speak for themselves, are relevant to avoid you needing to read the whole of the journal article, as it were. That's an attempt to be helpful to you. But in light of the evidence that you've already heard, I can, read out the summary conclusion of the journal article to help you understand what the point is. But you won't need any further submissions from Mr. Woodfield or Ms Reason, and as I say, that does give rise to a real risk that we will need some further evidence on it. We are just concerned that you have the latest scientific evidence available, because if you base your decision on evidence other than the latest scientific evidence, then that's, we say, not the proper course.
And what you mentioned pointing to the relevant parts. What are the relevant parts?
So the relevant parts of the so if you're happy for me to read, essentially,
not to read. Just tell me which paragraph it is that.
In the article itself. So we've got the abstract from the article, and the abstract indicates that bat hopovers, in which trees are planted to provide continuous cover.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah,
I don't need to read it out.
Well, okay.
So you're saying the abstract is the key thing, which seems a bit unusual.
Well, I think the point is made in the abstract. But obviously the journal article which sits underneath it provides the detail. But in terms of you understanding what the conclusions reached as a result of the scientific study in the article which has been produced, the abstract makes the point. But if you were minded to accept the article in, we would obviously highlight both the relevant parts of the abstract and the article that were relevant to you.
I'm probably going to have a chat with Mr. Clegg about this, but is there anything you want to add to what you've already said?
Well, no, sir, but I do want to reiterate, if new evidence is being put in by another party, we must be allowed the opportunity to respond to that new evidence. I mean, that is basic fairness, and bearing in mind that the applicant has the last word. I mean, I can't fathom why Mr. Parker thinks it would be appropriate to just stick in a paper, highlight a few paragraphs and leave you to it without giving us the opportunity to respond. That is totally inappropriate.
Well,
Well, no, I think I've heard what both parties have said about it. Just bear with me a second. Thank you. I've heard what both parties say about it. I'm not going to take a view on that now. We'll come back to you after we've had a break. Just to be clear, though, I mean, I don't know where we're going to get to with Mr. Whitby's evidence. Obviously, the applicant's expert has already spoken on it, so I'm not expecting to hear anything about that article until myself and Mr. Clegg have had another discussion and come back to you.
well, it's not relevant to Mr. Whitby anyway, because he doesn't give evidence on bats.
Yeah,
So.
just for the avoidance of doubt on that. Thank you. Just moving on to other things that we've received. What we have received from the applicant is an update from Mr. Franklin. Again, this is slightly different in that from what I've read, it's a factual update in terms of progress on discussions. So we're inclined to accept that, and I think that'll be helpful for all parties when we hear Mr. Franklin's evidence. There was, I think it was mentioned yesterday that, and Mr. Cameron explained the papers that were received relating to the GCP's approach to biodiversity net gain. We've received a written response from Coat and Orchard on that, but I was going to ask Mr. Parker in terms of views on those papers.
So I think we've received a note from Mr. Whitby and then the papers. So just dealing specifically with the papers on biodiversity net gain, that's obviously recent evidence and consistent with our position on the report. We say we have no issue with that document going in. In terms of any response to it, as matters stand, I think that I can probably deal with it by way of questions to Mr. Whitby by way of cross-examination, but I do just want to reserve my position pending anything that Mr. Whitby might say in examination in chief to see whether, in fact, we would ask for an opportunity to provide something in writing to whatever he might say. I think that's unlikely, but...
Well, yeah, I've noted that. I think also the applicant has mentioned that they will be drawing on that, so I'm minded to accept it. But obviously, if you have anything you want to add to that once that you've asked the opportunity to ask Mr. Whitby some questions, then let us know. Thank you. So just to confirm that those are, so I'll ask Mrs. Vincent to put those on the website if they're not already there. Thank you for that. I think that was all the updates on documents and other procedural matters. Is there anything that any other parties want to mention now before I ask Mr. Cameron to introduce his witness?
Yesterday, you and Mr. Clegg produced a list of statutory objectors, and you asked us to consider it and respond. We considered it. We are going to respond, and I hope the document will go in before Mr. Franklin gives evidence, so that he can answer any questions on it. But we've added something to that list. But
in terms of what you've added, is it an objector or a commentary on those?
There's no commentary. It's just the objectors and the plot numbers.
Okay.
We're not intending to add any commentary, just a list. And we've put it in 2 blocks. We've put outstanding objections in part 1, part 2, withdrawn objections.
That's very helpful.
Technically, they're withdrawn. They aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
But we just put them in the block because we noticed you had Claire Hall in as a withdrawn objection, so we copied your approach.
Yeah, it is helpful just to keep track of statutory objectors who were statutory objectors and who have now withdrawn their objections, so that's helpful.
And we've stuck to the definition of statutory objector as it appears in the rules, which then refers to section 11 subsection 4 of the Transport and Works Act, which in turn refers to the Acquisition of Land Act, just to make it easy. But that's what we've done.
Thank you. That's helpful. And yeah, if that is available before Mr. Franklin's call, that would be very, very helpful. Mr. Parker, is there anything you want to...
There's one additional note which has been canvassed before. I think it's now been agreed with the applicant in respect of house price increases, and I think the intention is to submit that as an agreed note. I think, Mr. Cameron will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's currently, as it were, with the applicant waiting their final confirmation that they're happy with it. But given that we've agreed to the changes that they had last suggested, I think it should be an agreed position. So that just needs to be submitted to you. I honestly can't recall whether you had accepted in principle to allow that document in, but if not, we would ask you to accept it in as an agreed document. That's the only other thing that I would raise at this stage by way of documents.
And just, again, I'm searching my memory banks here. Was this after Mr. Lee's evidence?
It was. The query had been raised as to how the applicant had calculated the figures for house price increases, and there's been some toing and froing as to how that explanation should be put before you in an agreed form. I think we now have that agreed form, so it's just that evidence.
Okay. Is that your understanding, Mr. Cameron, that there is an agreed note?
Yes, sir. All the discussions have taken place. I was going to say so long ago that I'd forgotten about them, but it better go. The point, sir, was that Mr. Whitehouse had explained that for the purposes of his analysis, he had assumed a 2.2% real house price growth over a 10-year, taken from a 10-year period. That's the average per year. That had been queried by Mr. Lee, and there's a note which explains where Mr. Whitehouse got his information from, and Mr. Lee where he gets his information from. So we've no issue with that going in.
Well, if that's agreed, yeah, we'd welcome that if you could provide it. Thank you. Is there anything else, Mr. Parker, you want to? I saw your finger hovering over the button there.
I think it's a note which reflects both parties' points of view rather than an agreed note. If one's being really pedantic about it, it sets out what Mr. Whitehouse says he did and what Mr. Lee said he did from memory. But we're happy that it goes in.
That's fine. And for our point of view, something that clearly sets out the two parties' positions is as helpful as an agreed thing on occasion. So thank you for that. In that case, unless there's anything else anybody wants to raise, I'll ask, I don't know whether it's Mr. Cameron or Mr. Henderson this morning to introduce the witness.
Back to me on this one, sir. So yes, I'll introduce Mr. Whitby. And so if we start with his note, please, CD 2985, and I'll introduce him by reference to that. Paragraph 1 on page 3, you explain your name is Paul Whitby. You're a managing director at the Ecology Co-op. You have a Bachelor of Science degree in Environment, Economics and Ecology. You're a full member of the Chartered Institute for Ecology and Environmental Management. You're a chartered ecologist through the same institute. You have 19 years' experience as an ecologist, including the production of EIA and ecological impact assessments, biodiversity impact calculations, designing mitigation schemes for developments, and producing and implementing protected species licenses. You've experienced as an expert witness on ecology matters through your appeal work for both public and private sectors. And for the last 3 years, you've served on the governing board of the CIEM. Is all of that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And can I ask you, just by reference to your paragraph 3, to explain your involvement?
Yes, I was first asked if I could appear at the inquiry in support of the GCP scheme around sort of mid-late October. Began a review of documents that supported the scheme, focusing on ecology matters, obviously, and the evidence that would be covered by Mr. Ian Ellis.
Excellent. Now, can we start, please? The first issue is the Coton Orchard County Wildlife Site. And I want to start, please, with its classification and the extent to which traditional orchard habitat is present within the site. So can we pick up, please, the relevant definition? So if you go to Mr. Woodfield's appendix DW5, which is PDF page 111, we have DW5 is the JNCC UK Biodiversity Action Plan Priority Habitats Descriptions, and we've got the definition on the bottom of PDF page 111. Yes, of course, sir.
The appendix number?
Yes, 5, sir.
Appendix 5, sorry.
Of course.
Sorry, I'm working electronically, so can you give me the...
111, sir.
111.
So, definition set out at the bottom. Mr. Whitby, before we get into the orchard specifically, what's your approach, please? And what do you say the correct approach is to the application of that definition?
My approach would be that to meet the criteria of being a traditional orchard habitat, you'd have to meet all of the description provided for that habitat definition.
Now, we've heard lots about questions of habitat structure, questions of habitat management. How do those issues, in your view, factor into the application of the definition and the understanding of what is a traditional orchard as it's defined here?
This document makes clear that habitat structure is the key defining feature of traditional orchard habitat, and I think there's an important reason why that is. Habitat management can remain fluid. Management can be changed from year to year with different practices implemented, whereas habitat structure is more of a constant. What I've said how I would approach this is essentially that identifying the habitat structure would be the key essential factor in defining or determining whether a habitat is traditional orchard. But I would suggest that if you had a habitat where the habitat structure met the right criteria, but the habitat management was lacking, as a precautionary approach, I would perhaps still identify that as traditional orchard, because habitat management can change, and you don't know when, in perhaps the recent past, that habitat management may have changed.
Sorry, did you say you would still identify that?
So if I had...
I just didn't catch what you...
Yeah, if I had identified that a habitat was structurally traditional orchard, but it was being managed inappropriately, I would still map it as traditional orchard. Whereas if a habitat is structurally not traditional orchard, but is managed in a way that is sympathetic towards traditional orchard habitat, it still is not traditional orchard because it doesn't meet the habitat definition.
Thank you for confirming that.
So with that approach in mind, your note please, page 4, paragraphs 11 and 12, at the bottom, you explain in your paragraph 11, you say technical report 5 sets out the extent of traditional orchard habitat present at Croton Orchard, measuring some 0.42 hectares, with the majority of the orchard and the area within the order limits comprising other orchard habitat totaling 1.33 hectares. You then go on in your paragraph 12 to refer to the JNCC document that we've just looked at. You explain that there's disagreement between Mr. Ellis and Mr. Woodfield, and then in the final sentence of paragraph 12 you say overall I prefer and agree with the assessment of Mr. Ellis. And can you explain why you reached that conclusion?
That is because his approach is to define the habitat according to structure over management. I think that he's been quite sympathetic in that approach, in that at the eastern end of the orchard, for example, you can see where the orchard has succeeded to scrub. But as he's said, and he set out in his evidence, he has still mapped a traditional orchard on the basis that that scrub could be managed back out. So that is again a case of changing management to restore the habitat.
And with that in mind, can I ask you to pick up his rebuttal proof of evidence, please, Mr. Ellis's rebuttal proof of evidence?
Mm-hmm.
And within that, go please to page 5. We have image 2, which is the cross-section. And the areas mapped as traditional orchards, as the annotation says, are shown in the red, and then the other areas are not. Applying what you've said to me about the definition and your agreement with Mr. Ellis, can you just explain that by reference to this figure, please?
So I had the opportunity to explore Croton Orchard last week and look at the density of tree planting across the orchard. Moving kind of left to right on that image, if you like, you've got very high density planting within rows there at about 1.8 metre spacing. Moving on to the next sections, you have averages ranging between the plum trees at 5.5, but other apple trees at about 3.8, 3.9 metres. These are spacings that are inconsistent with traditional orchard management. In the habitat description, it explains that for apple trees, typically at least 8 metres is expected between trees, and there's a target kind of tree density planting as well of around 150 hectares considered appropriate for traditional orchard. All the densities here are well above that, exceeding double the planting density or greater in most instances. There are, of course, some tree losses throughout the orchard, but that wouldn't really be considered as a means of it then meeting that criteria, because although the trees then have greater spacing where you've lost trees, they're still planted on dwarf rootstocks, and there's a continual description within a definition with the JNCC of vigorous rootstocks. Vigorous rootstocks are where trees are grown either in their own rootstock or they're planted on something like an M25, which is a rootstock which allows the tree to grow tall, have a central trunk, and develop a canopy. There's also within the JNCC description, it describes about its consistency with a habitat defined as wood pasture and parkland. And traditional orchards and wood pasture and parkland are both habitats that have evolved from the past using grazing management. So within traditional orchards and wood pasture parkland, you'd end up with trees with large open canopies, but with a grazed understory. So if you were to look at the trees, you'd have a flat line where the browsing of the livestock that pass under the tree effectively eat any limbs that are below that kind of browsing line. Obviously, if you've got a dwarf rootstock tree, which only grows to a height of about 2 metres at most of that canopy was in the browsing line, so your trees would obviously die off. So if you walk through Coton Orchard now and you look through at that habitat structure and you consider against its definition and its need to be of a similar vein to wood pasture and parkland, I think it's pretty clear it doesn't meet that definition.
Yeah.
Mr. Whitby, the area that you're talking about, which you say is too high a density, in your view, which part of the orchard are you talking about? The image on the page that we've been taken to refers to the western area.
I've kind of mapped them with tree sizes, so I can kind of talk them through to you in sections if you like. Effectively, where you've got the first red box on the left-hand side, so that is very clear, definite traditional orchard habitat. Those are large Bramley trees spaced apart by about 12 metres. So you've got 12 metre spacing between those trees. As you kind of move left from there, if you're looking at those sections, you've got trees with spacings at about 3.7 metres, then 1.8 metres, 3.9. The plum trees are at 5.5, but they're within the rows of apples at 3.9, if you like, and then you've got 1.8 metre spacing again. So all of that section are trees at high density. If you move the other side to the east of that traditional orchard section I just mentioned, you've got a section of pear trees. They're at an average 3.3 metre spacing. You can actually see the quince rootstock regenerating from around the base of those trees. That's a dwarf rootstock that they're grown on. And those are all clearly small trees. And then again, from the tree line, you can see just east of that again, before you get to the next section that has been mapped as traditional orchard, the other red box. You've got trees there, which again, a spacing is a little wider, but it's at the most about 4.6 metres, and all of those trees were measured as small as I walked through them.
But what the note under image 2 says, it refers to the remainder being mapped as grassland.
There is a section of grassland in there, that's correct. Sorry, you mean the mapping of the habitat as grassland? Yes. So within UK HAB guidance, they used to have a code which was just orchard habitats. You could put a code on that would cover any other orchard habitat, and they removed that by the time they came to the second revision. So where you don't have something that meets traditional orchard habitat and you don't have something that meets intensive orchard habitat, you can map a habitat as grassland but with the individual trees within it. So you map individual rural trees amongst the other neutral grassland habitat.
Thank you.
No problem.
So with bearing those answers in mind, can I just get you to confirm the parts of the JNCC document you're relying on? So if you go back, please, to Mr. Woodfield's proof of evidence and the Appendix 5, that's we're on PDF page 111.
Yes.
And we just looked at that definition. You've referred in your answer a moment ago to the type of rootstock, so you're referring there to the need for it to be planted on vigorous rootstock in that definition.
That's correct.
And you also refer to the density. Is the point here within that definition, what is a low density?
Yes, that's correct.
And then if you turn over the page, the PDF 112, you refer to the background explanation of the definition. Just draw the inspector's attention to the part that deals with this question of density that you were explaining, please.
Yes, it's the 6th paragraph down. It starts planting density depends. I'll just continue it. So it's planting density depends on the species of tree. For apple, pear and cherry, this will usually be less than 150 trees per hectare, approximately 8 metre spacing between the trees. But other species such as plum, damson, that may be higher. There is actually guidance on the creation of traditional orchard habitat, and I think part of how I would consider mapping traditional orchard habitat, I'd probably have to consider, right, if someone came to me saying that they wanted to establish a gain site for traditional orchard, what would my expectations be to create that habitat? And considering, of course, that we need to replace like for like, you have to use the same rules for mapping a habitat as a baseline at a site that's impacted. It is the same rules that you would apply for creating a new traditional orchard habitat. And the technical advice notes produced by Natural England mirror this. They talk about spacing for apple trees between 8 and 10 metres, low density, they mentioned vigorous rootstock, all of the same requirements that are set out within this description. And so if Coton Orchard, for example, had come to me saying they wanted to be themselves a gain site and improve the condition of this orchard, and they suggested it was all traditional orchard, would I be mapping it and be confident in taking that forward as a viable offset? And the answer is no. I would obviously map it in the same way as I would for a baseline, for an impact assessment.
Thank you. And I just want to pick up on the second point that you made in respect of the inspector's question. The question of using a term "other orchard" that appears in the environmental statement in the technical report, criticised by Mr. Woodfield, who prefers a binary traditional orchard or intensive orchard classification. What's your view on the appropriateness of the environmental statement using that term "other orchard" in this context?
Well, I think for the purpose of the environmental statement, you have an orchard as correct description. For the purposes of a metric, you do obviously have to find the most appropriate fit, and you don't always get the perfect fit, obviously, for any habitat, for every habitat that you'll come across. But this is most certainly the most appropriate fit, because if you are quite clearly not an intensive orchard, but you are quite clearly also not a traditional orchard, and there is quite a bit of a gap between the two, because traditional orchard requires clear intensive management. Intensive orchard obviously requires intensive management and the use of pesticides, fertilizer, etc. Traditional orchard has these very clear descriptions of the spacing of trees, habitat structure, similarity to wood pasture and parkland. There is quite a bit of a gap between the two. So it's absolutely fine to do as they have, which is map the grassland feature underneath and map the individual trees.
Now, the inspectors might have seen, but there's been some very recent new planting, even within the last couple of months at Trojan Orchard. Does any of that change the answers you've given or your assessment of how this should be appropriately categorised?
No, not for a baseline assessment, and I'd say that's because that is very new planting and those trees haven't established. The most critical time for a tree is in its first year, as its roots establish, having been transplanted. That's when you get the greatest failure in trees that have been planted, obviously. But also the target condition score as defined in the biodiversity metric is 20 years. So effectively traditional orchard actually becomes traditional orchard after a 20-year period.
Okay. Take you back to your note, please. We've dealt with paragraphs 11 and 12. Just go to your paragraph 13 at the bottom of page 4. You say, notwithstanding this conclusion, it's important to put this dispute in context. The identification of a priority habitat and the extent of the priority habitat is particularly significant in terms of biodiversity offsetting. However, notwithstanding the dispute over this point, it should be noted that the environmental statement appropriately considered ecological impacts regardless of this issue and has correctly determined that the impacts to the Trojan orchard are significant at a county scale, which Mr Woodfield did not disagree with in his written and oral evidence. So in the context of that, just to explain to the inspector, well, so what? Where does all of this dispute go to, in your view, as to how much of the area one may or may not describe as a priority habitat?
Well, there's clearly, I think, agreement on the scale of impact as set out in the environmental statement. So it's been identified as a county level of significance. And the importance is that an environmental statement can capture any nuance that might be required relating to, obviously not just the habitat, which is very much what a metric is focused on, but obviously everything within that habitat as well, the birds, the bees, and so on. The disagreement certainly relates purely to the biodiversity metric and how habitat values are rated through that metric. So effectively what the offset is.
Mr. Webb, can you just go a little bit slower, please?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start again on the metric?
Yes, please.
Yes. So the difference with between the environmental statement and the metric is very simply a tool to calculate a biodiversity offset requirement. What is the biodiversity impact considered according to the Environment Act? What is the offset that is required? So it isn't, in effect, the biodiversity metric isn't the impact assessment. It's separate to the environmental statement. It's purely a biodiversity calculation.
So that you've explained where the dispute lies, not in the ES but in the metric. We'll come back to the metric more generally, but I just want to keep working through the sites. The next issue is the Coton Path Hedgerow County Wildlife Site. There's been a criticism by Mr Woodfield of, to put it in the shorthand, the survey effort. Mr Ellis responds to this in his rebuttal proof of evidence. Ask you to go within that, please, to page 8. And there's a response.
So is that Ellis's rebuttal at page
Yes,
8?
Mr Ellis's
Yeah,
rebuttal proof of evidence, please, on
Yeah.
page 8. And there's a response there. It actually starts on the previous page, but the quotation runs over, and then Mr Ellis responds at 3.3.3 and 3.3.4. I'll ask you the general question first. Do you have any concerns about the survey effort undertaken for the purposes of the environmental statement?
No, I've looked at the botanical surveys undertaken, and I was satisfied with them. I didn't think it was quite fair to draw on a single scientific domain to reference the meadow. Let me remember now. Was it meadow barley? Was it? I think the hordeum. So I do this myself because I'm.
Sorry. You mentioned something about a single species, and so can you just repeat what? You
Yes.
said
Sorry. Yeah. So it's stated in there that along the startling areas, such as records for North American species hordeum brachyanthrum, rather than the native hordeum seculinum. So it's a grass, effectively. When I'm not very good with Latin myself, and when I've struggled recalling scientific nomenclature, and so I will punch into Google sometimes the common name for a species just to quickly try and draw out the scientific name as I'm working through. And I think that's probably the only criticism there, is that someone's just pulled the wrong scientific name off of Google. In reference to the, do you want to move on to the elms?
Well, I just want to ask you, just before we do the elms, on the meadow barley point, in Mr Ellis's paragraph 3.3.3, he concludes in the penultimate sentence, this has the name, did we get the right Latin name, has no implications beyond a simple clarification. Is that a view that you agree with?
Yes, it's not significant.
Does it have any consequence for this assessment of effect on any of the county wildlife sites, or indeed any of the designated sites?
It doesn't, no.
No. So the second point then is about elm and micro-species of elm, and what's your take on that, please?
It's an interesting one. There's actually only one native elm to the UK, which is wych elm. What we have in the UK is a variety of other elms which have been introduced over successive periods by Romans and Normans, etc., naturalised into the UK. And microspecies are effectively where you get a bit of a mixture of ongoing cloning and hybridisation between those species to create new microspecies in sort of localised areas. So there is something called the Cambridge elm. It is also highly disputed, so there are different botanists who agree with the establishment of these different groups of microspecies, and there are botanists who obviously report that there is up to, I think, 67 known different microspecies. When you're going into your assessments for an environmental statement, you obviously have to consider what your most sensitive receptors are likely to be and what is factors into your assessment as appropriate to present for planning purposes. And for me, no, I wouldn't have included in those elms because they're descendants of non-native mixes of trees, if you like. They might have some, possibly some sort of cultural value, I guess, but no, I don't see them as being important to factor into an environmental statement. There's also, for example, lots of microspecies of dandelion and bramble, but every planning application is supported by an assessment of exactly which microspecies of dandelion and bramble is present within a scheme.
And so Mr. Ellis, end of paragraph 3.3.4, says that in his view the categorisation of elms to species level is fully appropriate to inform the assessment of the scheme. Is that a view you agree with or disagree with?
I agree with that, yes.
And would the alternative approach of using a micro-species approach, would that have made any material difference to the assessment?
I do not believe it make any material difference to the assessment, no.
Right, so that's the first point about survey effort. Then the next point is about effect. So CD 11105, please, which is the technical report 5, CD 11105.
Being very slow to load, give me a moment. It's being very, very slow to load.
Let me know when you have it.
Yeah, I don't know if I might need to try and reload
Do you
the
want
page.
to? Do you want to try and do that, or
Progress bar's gone about halfway across and stopped, so I'll just try again.
yeah? May well be everyone's internet's about to collapse. Great. We will, Mr. We've got a workaround. We'll pop it on the screen for you.
That'd be useful, thank you.
That'll
Don't know why
speed things
everything else
up.
is loaded fine, but that one isn't.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can we go, please, within that to PDF page 56? And within this, we're dealing with non-statutory designated sites, construction impacts, And paragraph 6 to 12 provides the explanation in the ES. Trojan Path Hedgerow CWS is a linear habitat feature, approximately 0.9 hectares in area. Anticipated their maximum 0.03 hectares, so equivalent to 50 metres in length of this CWS, will be affected by the scheme during construction. No rare or notable plant species were present within this area that is expected to be lost to the scheme. So, and then on that basis, if we move forward to page 89, we see in the middle of that page, non-statutory designated sites, this is the left-hand column, the residual effects. The conclusion is, in respect of the Trojan Path Hedgerow CWS, no significant effects. That's the ES. And then the criticism made of it by Mr. Woodfield, if you go to his proof of evidence, paragraph 5.2.9 on page 25,
So it's supposed to be a page
25, sir, paragraph 5.2.9, it's PDF 29 if you're using the PDF. He takes the view in the middle of the page. In my view, this quantum of loss of a designated site, there's no dispute over the quantum, it's the number we've just looked at, is significant notwithstanding the particular plant species on the site and regardless of the fact that compensation is proposed. And can I ask you to comment on that criticism, please? Is that a fair and accurate criticism of the ES?
So I think it starts above that the 1% significant threshold is passed, and therefore it should have been calculated as a county level impact. Well, it is given a county level impact in the absence of mitigation and compensation. What the environmental statement does is take that initial baseline impact, apply the effects of the ability to plant new hedgerow habitat in close proximity to the existing far above that lost as an offset. And that therefore there is no significant impact as a consequence.
And is that an appropriate approach in your view, to look at the residual effects rather than the unmitigated effects? Yes,
that's correct. You look at them in order according to SIME guidelines. First, the effects of an impact in the absence of mitigation and compensation, but then your outcome once mitigation and compensation is applied.
Yeah, and the relevance of those species not being present, is that a relevant factor? Those species not being present within the 50 metres that we're talking about, is that relevant in your view?
In the citation, they are the reason for that designation. So the absence of them is significant, yes.
And what's the consequence of those species being absent within that 50 metres in your view?
It means it's unlikely that they are to be directly impacted.
So overall then, on the county wildlife site, the Trojan Path Hedgerow, do you have any reason to disagree with what's in the ES? Do you agree with it?
I agree with it.
Good. Right. Other sites, quickly. The SAC, can you just summarise, please, your position in respect to the SAC?
I've looked a little bit at the SAC, its proximity to the site. I understand that Natural England are satisfied with the outcome of the HRA that was provided to them regarding risk of impacts to its designating features.
And any cause for concern for you beyond that?
There's no cause for concern for me beyond that.
Scrubland east of the M11, that's a city wildlife site, and we just go back to CD 11105 and look again at PDF page 89 where we were. This is a city wildlife site where the conclusion is no significant effect.
Sorry, sir, page, please.
89, sir, in the PDF. Hopefully it's open.
Yes.
And it's in the middle, sir, residual effects, conclusion, no significant effects on the scrubland east of the M11 city wildlife site. Is that a conclusion that you agree with or disagree with, Mr. Whitby?
Yes, I agree with that. I noted that within the scheme, the creation of mixed scrub habitat far exceeds that lost.
Now, Mr. Woodfield tells us his proof of evidence, it's his 5 to 10, but I don't ask you to pick it up, but he tells us that he's not had the opportunity to visit that city wildlife site. Did you have that opportunity before giving your evidence today?
Yes, I visited that site last Friday.
The other city wildlife site is the Bin Brook city wildlife site, and again, same page in TR5, PDF 89. No significant effects identified on the Bin Brook city wildlife site. Is that a conclusion with which you agree or disagree with?
I agree with that conclusion.
And again, Mr. Woodfield, same reference, his 5.2.10 tells us he didn't have the opportunity to visit or survey that site. Did you have an opportunity before giving your evidence to do that for the Binbrook City Wildlife
I
site?
have visited that site, yes.
Thank you. That then takes us on to biodiversity net gain, and there's a number of component parts. The first component part here is the mapping or failure to map trees within Coton Orchard. What's your take on that issue, please, Mr. Whitby?
So at the time that I understand the site was first assessed and mapped, it was according to UK HAB version 1, but also is using the biodiversity metric 3.1. And the biodiversity metric 3.1 doesn't give you the capacity to map rural trees. That changed by the time that the statutory metric came about. And the important change there was that the original mapping obviously gave this ability to map orchard habitat or other orchard habitat, which would capture the value of the trees present. But by the time you came through to the statutory metric, that position had changed, and so there was the need to map individual rural trees. The ability to map individual rural trees was also added into the statutory metric. That is something that will need to be picked up in the future at detailed design.
Yeah, and Mr. Ellis says essentially exactly that at his 3.43. He says recognised individual trees will need to be included in the final BNG calculation. Pending that, though, does the omission of those trees in the interim calculation give you any cause for concern about the ability to achieve biodiversity net gain in respect of this development?
No, given that the capacity I've seen that is available for biodiversity offsetting and given the quantum of trees, no, I'm satisfied that that can easily be offset.
And is there capacity to deal with this on-site, in whole or in part?
In part, yes. I think some is likely to be required off-site.
And in respect of the metrics that you've seen, has the on-site potential been taken into account?
Yes, within the WSP's metric, they have utilised much of the scheme to identify where opportunities lie for new habitat creation.
And if it has to be, some part of it has to be off-site, Mr. Ellis in his evidence refers to Lower Valley Farm as the option there. What's your take, please, on the appropriateness of Lower Valley Farm if that off-site is required?
So I've had a look into Lower Valley Farm and its capacity. It's understood to have over 1,000 biodiversity units capacity within it. It is somewhat of a blank slate, so it's existing arable land or formerly arable land in part now. So it does exist as a bit of a blank slate in order to create habitats required for offsetting, and establishing individual rural trees is pretty easy. It comes at low risk.
And in respect to Lower Valley Farm, Mr. Woodfield will ask some questions about it. He has his 2 points. First is about watercourse units. So let's just deal with that. And then secondly is about foraging habitat. Watercourse units. In your view, are new watercourse units likely to be required as part of the BNG exercise at the detailed design stage?
Yes, we know that watercourse units will be required because there are watercourses within the scheme limits. So of course it forms part of the baseline, and therefore to create your 10% uplift automatically you would have to create watercourse units. But I have seen a high-level assessment suggesting the loss may be around half a unit, as in the total loss to the footprint of the scheme. I've considered this against, from my site visits, the likely scores of those watercourses, and I feel that they're probably consistent. There is a lot of information to come forward from a detailed assessment and, of course, from detailed design, which means there may be some swing there. But essentially, am I convinced that the total impact or the total number of units is low? And the answer is yes.
And are there any opportunities on site to address, either in whole or in part, those watercourse units?
There's some quite limited potential. There's encroachment of the riparian zone that could be resolved, although that is fairly localised. And they have highlighted the potential to remove some culverts, so you get an uplift from the removal of culverts. But most most requirement is going to be off-site.
And in that regard, can I ask you to pick up, and I'm just checking if we have a CD number. Now, I think we do. If you go CD 2993-1, so it's the penultimate entry on the CD 29s. It's a BNG paper put to the GCP's executive board
29.
a little under a week ago. 2993-1.
Got it. Okay.
Let me know when you're there.
Just loading. Yep, I've got that.
And on the issue of watercourse units, can I ask you to turn forward, please, to PDF page 5.
Yep.
And paragraph 412 to begin with, meeting 20% BNG, referring of course to 20% just the GCP's ambition, not the statutory 10%. For linear aquatic habitat will require additional measures. Market for linear aquatic habitat within Cambridgeshire is extremely constrained. Purchasing linear aquatic habitat from outside the local catchment area would incur a risk multiplier penalty. And then move down to 413. Cambridge City Council manages a number of awarded watercourses. GCP and City Office have been working together to develop a shared approach to meeting the BNG requirements for GCP schemes while maximising local benefits. By investing in habitat creation and enhancement on these watercourses, the GCP will be able to deliver linear aquatic BNG locally and in doing so capture the positive externalities of habitat creation within the local area. Initial survey works have been undertaken on 3 watercourses, assessing the feasibility of, and then we get the 3 listed there, including the first one referred to the Sheep's Green scheme. And turn over please to 414. Of these options, the Sheep's Green scheme is the most deliverable from a technical perspective, and therefore it's recommended that this is taken forward first. And then can you pick up please 2993-2, which is the decision summary, the output of the meeting in question. And can you look please on page 2 at number 8?
Yep.
And you'll see there's a series of bullet points there. I'll ask you to look please at C, approve the next stage of work to deliver linear aquatic habitat on awarded watercourses managed by Cambridge City Council, beginning with the Sheep's Green scheme. So that's the decision of the GCP on the 6th of November. And can I ask you, how does this, if at all, factor into the question of providing watercourse units off-site that you've just referred to?
Well, this does provide watercourse unit uplift within an appropriate locality. I've had the opportunity to visit the Sheep's Green scheme site. It's been assessed by MKA Ecology, and it's been determined that it has the capacity to deliver 2.21 watercourse units. It's in an appropriate location, the ability to channel water from adjacent watercourses through a kind of an open parkland habitat structure, which would appear to be entirely appropriate for new watercourse unit creation.
Would this be capable of meeting any off-site requirements for watercourse units arising from the proposed busway?
I would anticipate this meeting all of those requirements.
Yeah. And even if it doesn't, what happens then?
If it doesn't, I understand there are other options available to GCP. There's Cherry Hinton Brook, a chalk stream, mapped to have 17.14 units, currently graded in poor condition, and potential there for that in condition to be improved.
And even if GCP can't do it themselves, what happens then under the metric?
You can go to market. You can find available watercourse units through the biodiversity gains register.
And we know in that regard, paragraph 412 that I read out, constrained market in Cambridgeshire, expensive opportunities or mismultiplied opportunities elsewhere. If those opportunities elsewhere had to be taken, would that satisfy the metric in your view if we got that far?
It would. There's a process to be followed called the biodiversity mitigation hierarchy. And that mitigation hierarchy means that effectively it's the same as the mitigation hierarchy, but it's effectively that you're avoiding impacts to biodiversity units as and where possible. You're creating biodiversity within your scheme where possible. And where you can't do those things, you move to the most local geographic context available. And if that's not available, you can move right the way through to statutory credits.
Mr. Whitby, do you know whether Sheep's Green has been considered in relation to any other projects?
I do not know that, no.
So are you sure about its availability?
I've been assured that Sheep's Green will be secured for this scheme, and that the capacity Sheep's Green has clearly meets the likely deficit required for this scheme.
But that's without taking account of anything else that might come forward.
If other schemes come forward, I presume there may be potential for competition. Like I said, there's other schemes that they've highlighted to me that they're working on to make sure that any local infrastructure projects or indeed other development projects have a resource capable, as many other councils are doing, trying to make sure that biodiversity net gain isn't a limitation to progress by making sure that the hardest units to find are sought and provided and made available to market.
Mr. Whitby, can you just clarify for me in terms of the report uses the phrase awarded watercourses? What's an awarded watercourse?
That's a good question. That's one for them, I think. Their watercourses, I think, in their control is perhaps what they're referring to.
I couldn't find a definition in the. Okay, I'll leave that as something I'll need to find out at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the other point, bat foraging habitats, and the concern of Mr. Woodfield's about provision within or without the core sustenance zone. Can I ask you to pick up Miss Reason's appendices, please? And within that goes, please, to PDF 43. And Miss Reason presents a baseline habitats.
Mr. Henson, could you please slow down?
Of course, sir. Miss Reason's appendices.
Yeah.
PDF 43, sir. And Mr. Whitby, on that page, Mr. Reason set out the baseline habitats and the post-development habitats.
Yeah, well, I understand.
Plan.
Sorry.
So, well, I was going to say, help me if you understand it first, and I'll put the question. I'm not going to stop you. Go on.
What I understand this to show is an assessment that Ms. Reason has undertaken to identify what habitats are present in the existing baseline that are of value to Barbastell bats, and what habitats are of value to Barbastell bats post-development. So that is after the scheme in its current design has created all of the new habitats to replace. I think about 60% of the scheme is currently hard standing and cropland. So she's got a baseline score there of bat foraging habitat within the baseline of 25 hectares and a baseline, a post-development value for bat foraging habitat post-development of 37 hectares. So a lift of 12 hectares of habitat of value for Barbastell bats from the scheme in its current form.
So, having regard to that, and in the context of the BNG metric and the compensation to be provided, do you have any concerns about the provision of adequate compensation within the core sustenance zone, either in terms of amount or type?
I don't know. I think that it's important that biodiversity net gain and protected species requirements are considered separately. In fact, it's entirely necessary. You have to design in your compensation for species on a case-by-case basis within each scheme before you start considering biodiversity net gain for two reasons. First is obviously compliance with the habitats regulations. If you're destroying a certain area of dormouse habitat, you have to try and replace, obviously, on a like-for-like basis at least, or ensure there's an uplift. And in doing so, when you come to undertake your biodiversity calculations, you're not allowed to use any compensation that's designed for protected species to count towards your 10% uplift. So it's important that you undertake your protected species habitat creation compensation measures entirely separately of biodiversity calculations.
And do you have any concerns in that regard on this specific point, the foraging habitat for the bats?
No, I don't. No.
Thank you. Finally, then, I just want to ask you about the mitigation hierarchy. Pick up, please, the framework. You may want, hang on, you want to know a reference from me for that?
Yes,
I've got mine
please.
separately. If you go, please, to CD 8, and you'll find it as CD 8.1. And we're looking for 193, which is on PDF page 56. We get the mitigation hierarchy in 193A.
CD 8-01.
Correct, that should be the
Yep.
framework. And if you go to PDF 56, and you'll get the framework paragraph 193.
Yep.
And mitigation hierarchy in 193, so paragraph A.
Yes.
I'll ask you for your view, please, as to whether the scheme has complied with 193A and the mitigation hierarchy therein.
Yes, I think it's demonstrably been met.
Why do you say that?
As set out within within what we've just discussed, we know that there is going to be some biodiversity impact from the scheme, although there is a calculated uplift overall. We've got the capacity to ensure that we're going to hit 20% biodiversity net gain post-development. That is incorporating both on-site enhancements as required following the biodiversity mitigation hierarchy, and then utilising off-site options as well for a variety of habitats that need to be created.
Thank you. So they're all my questions in chief. Can I just pick up your point about the awarded water courses? Mr. Whitby's absolutely right. We've checked the point in the few minutes since he gave the answers. Those water courses which are managed by, in this case, the City Council.
So is the term awarded just the phrase that the authority uses for?
In that document, that is the phrase used, and the simple point for your takeaway, sir, is that those water courses listed as awarded are ones which are managed by the City Council.
By Cambridge City Council. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Mr. Parker.
I couldn't help but overhear discussing the possibility of a break. There are a couple of things which have been said in Examination Chief by reference to the updated note that Mr. Whitby provided that we only received a couple of days ago. I would appreciate the opportunity, if it were convenient, to take the break now so I can discuss those points with Mr. Woodfield before I start my cross-examination. I don't anticipate them taking a great deal of time, but given that we received the note, I think less than 48 hours ago, and given what Mr. Whitby said, I would just ask for that opportunity.
Okay, in that case, I was looking to take a break around 11 o'clock, but I don't see there's a problem with taking a slightly earlier break. We'll adjourn now and we'll resume at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
The inquiry's resumed. There's just a few things I want to mention before I ask Mr. Parker to ask any questions in cross-examination. It's been brought to my attention that I think yesterday, when we were having a discussion about the start time today, that I think we got to the point where perhaps we'd said sort of 10 o'clock, and then adjourned, and then very briefly sort of resumed. And unfortunately, I think some people had heard that, and I think the recording sort of stops. So, you know, unfortunately, there was, I think, a bit of a risk there that people would have thought that today we were starting at 10 rather than 9:30. So it's unfortunate that happened. The reason why we wanted to start at 9:30 is on sort of immediate reflection was just the amount of evidence we needed to get through. For those people who didn't get here until a bit later, I'm sorry about that. Obviously, there is the opportunity to watch on the recording of anything that was missed in person. And also, I think particularly importantly today, from my notes, Mr. Whitby wasn't actually called until about I've got 9:53. So in terms of actual evidence being heard that was being missed, it would have been relatively limited. And what we always do is to endeavour through Mrs. Vincent to make sure that the programme's always got the correct times on. So that was what was on the what was on the programme. And so just a reminder that we will need to make sure that that stays up to date. Second thing I wanted to just raise about the county and city wildlife sites, and indeed the triple SI. Mr. Clegg and myself haven't been able to find the actual sort of citations, descriptions, designations of those particular ones. We have the information for Coton Orchard County Wildlife Site, but in terms of the others, including the ones that have been mentioned in evidence this morning, the Scrubland, the M11, the Binbrook City Wildlife Site, and the other the hedgerows, the Coton hedgerow. We haven't got those, and I'm not sure. So I'm also not sure whether we've actually got the description of the SAC, which was mentioned. Now, it may well be that they are there somewhere in the evidence, hiding away in an appendix or in somebody's proof. So the request is could either we be signposted to where we could find those citations or descriptions, or if they're not in the evidence, could we have them, please?
Understood.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And so I suppose, can anybody answer sort of straight away as to whether they're there but we just haven't found them, or whether they are actually something that needs to be found?
Well, so we'll check, and if they're not there, we'll provide them.
Thank you. And the third thing I wanted to mention was, if you recall at the start, I said that rather than take a decision straight away on the Bat Hopover article that Mr. Parker provided, that I'd reflect on that. Having reflected on it and having heard what both parties have said, I think we're prepared to accept the article. But as I think Mr. Henderson said, obviously the applicant will be given an opportunity to make any comments that they want to on that in writing, and it is only fair that the applicant should be able to do that. So for the avoidance of doubt, I think I'm not asking for any sort of covering note, unless we really, there is something a single one-liner that says paragraphs X, Y, Z are the ones to look at. I think what's important here, because of I accept that the article wasn't available when either Ms. Reason or Mr. Woodfield gave evidence. Obviously it's arrived when it's arrived. But I think given at this stage of the inquiry, I don't think we can have a sort of toing and froing on evidence. So CPPF have provided it. The applicant's going to have an opportunity to respond to that in writing. I think Mr. Henderson.
Yes, that's absolutely fine, sir. We'll get that done hopefully this week, so well in advance of next week and closings.
Thank you. Mr. Parker.
I note that and accept that. I mean, all I would say is that insofar as there is response from the applicant in writing, it does need to be limited to the effect of the journal article. And I am concerned that the opportunity shouldn't be taken to bolster or provide other evidence in relation to bat hopovers, mitigation generally, all that sort of stuff. The scope of any written response, we would say, does have to be very narrow and limited to what the article says, because otherwise an issue of fairness does arise. I appreciate your concern not to have toing and froing of evidence, but it wouldn't be fair to us if Ms. Reason were given the opportunity to produce new evidence on hopovers and mitigation generally that we didn't then have the opportunity to respond to. So I entirely accept what you say, but I just want to sort of put down that marker, and no doubt you will be astute and will be astute to ensure that anything that goes in is very limited in scope in terms of what the article actually says.
Well noted. However, you provided the article. It's only fair that the applicant responds to that, and
that's right. So I would say that given now the applicant knows of the existence of the article, one would presume that Ms. Reason, in the discharge of her professional duties, would equally want you to have the latest scientific evidence. So I don't think this is really a situation in which CPPF can be accused of wanting to put in new evidence. I would assume that you, sirs, would want the latest scientific evidence. We are trying to be helpful to the inquiry. So I appreciate that the applicant will need to have the opportunity to comment. This isn't a response to some new point that CPPF wants to make. Everyone should want this evidence, frankly, before the inquiry, because it is the latest scientific evidence. And all I'm saying is, yes, the applicant should have the opportunity to respond, but limited solely to the consequences of the journal article.
Yep. Well, Mr. Henderson said he'll respond by the end of the week. You'll be able to see what the response is. If you consider that there's an issue of fairness in what they've responded to, then we'll hear what's to be said about it. But on that point, Mr. Henderson, do you want to respond to Mr. Parker?
No, sir. All I asked you for this morning was a chance to respond to the note, and that's all I seek, and you've granted that. I don't need to bolster my case any further on it. I just need to respond to the note.
Well, on that basis, I mean, hopefully Mr. Henderson's assurance has given you the assurance you want as well. Yeah, I quite understand because it would be unfortunate if at this stage in the inquiry, perhaps another contrary article is discovered, and then we end up with a ping pong of late evidence going around. So on that understanding, we've accepted the article. The applicant's going to respond to the note. Hopefully by the end of this week, you'll be able to see the note. And I think from what Mr. Henderson said, that should address the matter. Thank you. Those are the points I wanted to raise. So now, Mr. Parker, if you've got questions for Mr. Whitby, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Whitby.
Morning.
I'm going to start with what I hope are some relatively uncontroversial questions, and then move on to some topics which are clearly in dispute between us. I just want to start with some basic points about the mitigation hierarchy. And I just want to ask you one question. We all know what the mitigation hierarchy says, and I've asked questions to Ms. Reason about it. But it's right, isn't it, which a scheme which avoids any impacts arising is, according to the mitigation hierarchy, preferable to a scheme which has potential impacts, likely significant effects, which are then required to be mitigated, even if there is evidence to demonstrate that those effects can be mitigated. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
Now, as you may know, I hope you know, CPPF has promoted an alternative to the GCP scheme, And I just want to ask you very briefly some questions about that, just to confirm the scope of Mr. Ellis's evidence and the scope of your evidence in respect of those matters. And as I understand it, I can ask those questions relatively shortly because you haven't presented evidence in relation to those matters. So if you can just turn up Mr. Woodfield's proof of evidence.
Yes, I've got that.
In section 3 of that proof of evidence, which begins on PDF page 12 or page 8 of the document, there is a whole section describing the baseline conditions for the CPPF alternative scheme. Now, neither Mr. Ellis and you, by way of adoption, have challenged that part of his evidence to the inquiry. That's right, isn't it?
I haven't assessed in detail at all the CPPF scheme.
That's helpful. So just again for confirmation, section 4, Mr. Woodfield sets out his evidence in respect of the impacts that would arise by reference to the CPPF alternative. If you look down at the bottom, paragraph 4.5.1, he concludes that there would be very modest losses of generally low-grade roadside habitats ubiquitous along both the local and wider road network. And again, you don't provide any evidence in relation to the nature or extent of the likely effects of the CPPF alternative scheme, do you?
I don't know.
And so it follows, therefore, you don't dispute what's said by Mr. Woodfield in his evidence. And
I've got no reason to dispute the habitat losses identified in Table 1.
Now, if you can please take up Mr. Ellis's proof of evidence, the main proof, and it's PDF page 15. Which is internal page 13. Mr. Ellis in this section, I think unfortunately there's a slight glitch in the paragraph number because all of the paragraphs begin with 1, but he deals with habitats in that first section running through to 1.1.96, and he identifies that there will be impacts on habitats, but that these can be mitigated, yeah?
Correct.
And then I'm going to give you the list of the species and ask you one question at the end because the same point arises in relation to all of them. But in terms of aquatic ecology, badgers, water vole, reptiles, amphibians, terrestrial invertebrates, birds, I think that's the final heading. In terms of all those species, he identifies that there will be effects which are required to be mitigated.
Some of these are negligible. So, for example, with reptiles, there was no identified reptile presence within this order limit. I think there was reptiles identified just off-site, I think at a distance of 70 metres. I think likewise that the effects of Great Crested Newt presence was deemed to be fairly negligible as well.
Fine, but answer to my question, subject to those caveats, I mean, even in respect of those species, mitigation was identified to be necessary, subject to those caveats. Subject to those caveats, I'm right, aren't they, that in respect of each of those species, likely significant effect, mitigation required, yeah?
Correct.
So, I should also note, we've heard evidence in relation to bats on behalf of the applicant from Ms. Reason, and so I'm not going to include bats in that list. I have my answers from her about the application of the mitigation hierarchy. But aside from bats, all of the other species that we've looked at, just simply accepting what's set out in the appellant's evidence at face value, it must be right, mustn't it, that the CPPF alternative is sequentially preferable in terms of the mitigation hierarchy, because the evidence before the inquiry is that the CPPF alternative would not give rise to impacts, whereas the applicant scheme gives rise to impacts which are required to be mitigated. That's correct, isn't it?
So if we focus purely on ecology and purely on the mitigation hierarchy and the risk of impacts upon certainly these species or groups, indeed, then yes, you'd say that the CPF scheme is preferable, isolated from things like engineering, health and safety, etc., everything else that might come along with the scheme. I noticed the omission of bats in that, and I know perhaps that's already old ground, I want to rake over it again, but I know there's a concern about the widening of the road, loss of trees, etc., along the side of Madingley Wood, and the impact that might have on the adjacent Barbastell Bat maternity roost, which I think was covered by Miss Reason in her evidence.
Yeah, so you'll be aware that Ms. Reason's position was that the CPPF alternative would not be likely to have any significant effect. Yeah, you're aware of that? I don't want to go. You're not giving evidence on bats. The inspectors have got a note of what she said. Let's not rake over old ground. You essentially adopt or rely upon, to the extent it's relevant, you don't depart from what Ms. Reason said in her evidence in relation to bats.
I think there was the caveat in there on Ms. Reason's evidence of that there hasn't been, obviously, the detail provided with the CPF scheme to understand exactly what trees would be lost. Obviously, there's detail to...
Well, there is detail. We've been round that.
I think Mr. Parker and Mr. Whitby, we don't really want to get into that this morning. I think it was made clear that what the scope of your evidence was and that it didn't include bats.
I'm fine to skip.
I think we should really stay away from that.
Thank you. So that's very helpful. I've got your clear answer in that respect. So let's move on then to some points of dispute between yourself and Mr. Woodfield in relation to, firstly, the assessment of habitat loss and this issue about the extent of Coton Orchard, which qualifies as a priority habitat. If you can take up, please, Mr. Woodfield's proof of evidence and the appendices to it. It's Appendix DW6, which I'm going to refer to, which is an image. That's page 116 of the PDF.
Yep, I have that.
Sorry, yeah. So we can see here an assessment taken from the ES of the extent of the habitat which is identified to be traditional habitat, and we can see that it's the sort of lime green hatching without the yellow background. I don't know if that's the best way of describing it, but that's the area which has been assessed by WSP and the ES as being traditional orchard habitat. And then if we look down to Figure 1 and Figure 2 in this note, which are images at the end of the note, so it's page 124 and 125 of the PDF, there are some full-page images. At the end of... So it's DW6 1 and then DW6 2. They're given drawing numbers. So the DW6, the appendix itself, is 8 pages, and there are 2 images at the end of...
Are you in the appendices?
I am.
Because there's a separate set of figures.
I know, it's not. It's so they're I think they're figures attached to Appendix DW6.
Right. Okay.
So it's DW6, and there's just a couple of images at the end.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, we can see here the position put forward by Mr. Woodfield, and the first image, Figure 1, is zoomed out, and the second image is the same but zoomed in. Mm-hmm. And we can see that Mr. Woodfield, in terms of the orange diamonds, he's obviously mapped a greater amount of the woodland as being traditional orchard. That's the extent of the dispute between us. That's as you understand it. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, there's a couple of things there. There's the mapping of traditional orchards. There's also within this the mapping of what is medium-size trees.
Yeah. So we can come. I think that's probably relevant to the BNG assessment, and so we'll come back to that. But in terms of traditional orchard, so the inspectors understand the scope of the dispute. That's the scope of the dispute, and essentially to determine the dispute between yourself and Mr. Woodfield, the inspectors would need to decide for themselves whether the parts of Coton Orchard, which Mr. Woodfield says are traditional orchard, fall within the JNCC definition, and that will be a matter of judgment ultimately for them, won't it?
Correct.
So just let's quickly take up the definition. We've looked at this a few times, so I don't want to spend a long time on it, but it's page 108 of Mr. Woodfield's proof of evidence PDF, or it's the appendix DW5. And we can see there's a definition on the second main page, page 111 at the bottom, traditional orchards, UK HAP definition. And in terms of the approach, that definition obviously needs to be understood in the context of the description which is above it. Would you accept that as a matter of approach?
I'd say that there's a lengthy description of traditional orchard habitat and how it should look, and then there's a definition of the habitat provided at the end to qualify.
Now, it's right, isn't it, that in terms of this document, there is a contrast drawn between traditional orchard on the one hand and intensively managed orchard on the other hand. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
And there's no other category of orchard which is identified or referred to in this JNCC definition document, is there?
Not in this JNCC document, no.
And if we look at the description, for example, page 110, the bottom of the main first page, there's a paragraph beginning traditional orchards. Have you got that? So it says, yep. Traditional orchard defined for priority habitat purposes as orchards managed in a low intensity way, in contrast with orchards managed intensively for fruit production. Yeah. So there's in that part of the description, there's actually no reference to the nature of the root stocks or anything else. The definition in that part of the description, at least, is referable simply to the management. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very isolated part of the description.
Yeah, indeed. And it's important to understand the definition and the description as a whole. It wouldn't be appropriate to pick one element of the description or the definition and, as it were, to treat that as a condition precedent to the fulfilment of the definition of the habitat.
So I think what I've made clear is that for the purposes of being defined as traditional orchard habitat, you should meet the fulfilment of the habitat definition.
Okay. But it's right, isn't it? Would you accept, I mean, answer my question, you treat the definition in the round, don't you, and reach an overall judgment by reference to the definition in the context of the description as to whether this qualifies as the habitat.
I define the habitat as per the definition provided in that document, which is what is at the bottom.
Okay.
Everything above is a description of traditional orchard habitat, and then the definition is provided at the end.
Okay. Well, let's look at this, back to the dichotomy then between traditional and intensive orchards that we were looking at. So we see here, traditional orchards defined for priority habitat purposes as orchards managed in a low intensity way. And no dispute between us, this is an orchard which is managed in a low intensity way. That's right, isn't it? So
it's, yeah, broadly, yes. I mean, it's not fertilised, it's not sprayed. It does appear to be fairly regularly mown. It's the grassland sward within the orchard is fairly species poor, so it's consistent with the habitat that may have been subject to regular mowing, but it is relatively low intensity management for sure. It's obviously not a commercial orchard.
Yeah. And so if we then look at the contrast, and so then the contrast is provided to orchards managed intensively, reference to fertilisers, frequent mowing of the orchard floor rather than gazing or cutting for hay, and planting of short-lived, high-density dwarf or bush fruit trees. So in terms of the type of fruit trees and the way in which they're actually planted, the description refers to dwarf or bush fruit trees, high densities, in association with intensively managed orchards, doesn't it? That's where that reference comes from.
Yeah, and I think the point is that this orchard has been created as an intensive orchard. It's the management that's led to it becoming slightly something else. Like I said, it's not intensive orchard because that management lacks, but because it's habitat structure that is the key definition for this habitat. It's the structure, not the management, that is most important. That is what defines the habitat as per the definition.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, when you're in a situation where you're not we're dealing with a world which doesn't fit into neat categories always, Mr. Whitby, and we're dealing here with a situation in which there is a habitat which doesn't necessarily fit neatly into a particular category, but I want to then explore those uncertainties, because I think when you look at let's look at your photograph, or Mr. Ellis's photograph. So it's Mr. Ellis's rebuttal, photograph 1 under paragraph 3.1.14, page 6, to illustrate the point. Have you got that?
I've got that photograph here.
Yeah. So the essentially what Mr. Ellis says in his rebuttal is that the trees on the right are accepted to be traditional orchard, whereas the trees on the left are not accepted to be traditional orchard, primarily by reference to their size. Yeah, he says they're dwarf fruit trees and therefore can't qualify as traditional orchard.
Correct.
And that's your position, essentially, isn't it? That because they're planted on dwarf rootstocks, they can't be traditional orchard.
Dwarf rootstock, planting density, correct, yeah.
Yeah, but 2 points on that. It's right, isn't it, that looking at that photograph, there cannot be any sensible dispute that we're looking at fruit trees planted as part of an orchard, aren't we? As a matter of common sense, that's what we're looking at.
We're looking at, yes, of course.
Yeah. So if there is a dichotomy between traditional orchard and intensive orchard, and you're being pushed to say whether this is a traditional orchard or an intensive orchard, would you agree that it would fall within the traditional category?
I would say that no, it would go to intensive orchard. I think the sympathetic approach that has been taken is to map the grass and habitat and the individual trees. If you map traditional orchard, it's actually a very low score within the metric. So you don't capture really the accurate biodiversity value. What is fairer to this assessment is to capture that value by taking the value of the grassland sward and mapping all of the individual trees. Because for habitat structure purposes, this is intensive orchard. This section within the photograph that you can see.
Yeah, okay, but doesn't the suggestion that this intensive orchard entirely make the point that as a matter of common sense, that's absurd? I mean, this is clearly not, when you're standing in that field and looking at those trees, this is clearly not an intensively managed orchard, is it? Let's look at the photograph provided by Mr. Woodfield of an intensively managed orchard. If you can take up his proof of evidence.
Yep.
So it's a page 118 of the PDF, which, it's Appendix DW6, page 3 of that note. So it's page 3 of DW6. There's 2 photographs. The top one is identified as typical intensive orchard. I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. Whitby, just as a matter of judgment, you're seriously suggesting that the inspectors stand in that field and look at the trees and have to decide whether what they see is an intensive orchard or a traditional orchard, you're saying that they should identify it as an intensive orchard. That can't be right with respect, can it?
I think the photographs have taken somewhat of the extremes. The photograph above is a young orchard recently planted. The photograph below is I would say an intensive orchard reaching the end of its lifespan. That you can see that there's been significant die-off of trees there. There's big open spaces. One feature of trees on dwarf rootstock is they're not long-lived. The reason that they're favoured over vigorous rootstocks is, of course, that the trees don't grow too tall. They're easy to manage, easy to prune, easy to collect the fruit. But you have a trade-off that a tree on very small roots doesn't live as long, and that's the case with this orchard. It's reaching the end of its lifespan.
Well, indeed, you bring me on to the next point, which is the photographs that we see, the dwarf trees that we see, and the trees which are in Coton Orchard have, as Mr. Woodfield explained, far outlasted their original lifespan. That's right, isn't it?
When you say, you mean as in commercial lifespan, as if they would have been replaced at this point?
The trees that we can see in the photographs have lasted and lived far longer than one would have expected for a dwarf tree planted as part of an intensive orchard, haven't they?
I don't think that's a conclusion I would come to, no.
Okay, so they gain...
A vigorous rootstock tree has a lifespan of 80 to 120 years, typically.
Yeah.
These trees are far short of that time.
Well, I'm not sure that that's right, and that Mr. Whitby. So let's suppose that these trees had lived for decades. In that situation, if you were satisfied that although they were planted on dwarf rootstocks, they were of some considerable age, would that lead you to alter your conclusion as to whether they were qualified as traditional orchard?
But they are clearly dwarf rootstock trees, is the point.
Answer my question, because I'm asking you specifically about the lifespan. You said your assumption was these were not old trees. If you're wrong about that, and in fact these trees have far outlasted their lifespan, they are of some vintage, then would that alter your conclusion?
No, it wouldn't, because it's patently obvious that these are dwarf rootstock trees, and it's patently obvious there's been significant die-off of those trees because they're beyond their expected lifespan.
Okay, well, let's explore the consequence of that in terms of the evidence that you and Mr. Ellis provides. If you can take up Mr. Ellis's rebuttal, please.
Yep.
And look again at image 2 on page 5, sorry.
Yep, I have that.
So the right-hand box, red box on that image, that's an area of the orchard which you accept qualifies as traditional orchard, yeah?
Yeah, it's close to the limits, and the spacing of the trees is around 6 metres in that section, and obviously, as I kind of talked through earlier, typically traditional orchard spacing is between 8 and 10 metres.
Yeah, exactly. So first point spacing is that your position is that orchard can qualify as traditional orchard, notwithstanding that the spacing between the trees is less than 8 metres or whatever figure is referred to in the guidance, yeah?
Well, the point is it's got to meet all of the descriptions, so it's not just spacing, it's also the rootstock
Yeah,
that's
sure.
grown on the
Just
sides of the trees.
answer the question, Mr.
canopies.
Whitby. Answer the question.
You'd like to repose it?
Yeah. You're welcome to caveat, but I need to answer my question. Your position is that areas of this orchard can qualify as traditional orchard, notwithstanding that the spacing between the trees is not exactly the specific density referred to in the JNCC definition, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that on a precautionary basis, I'm happy to accept that WSP's mapping of that is traditional orchard based on the 6 metre spacing and the fact that the rootstocks appear to be at least semi-vigorous.
Well, again, that's another point of dispute, because our understanding is those trees that you see in that red box are dwarf rootstocks, no different from the rootstocks in the photos that we were looking at. And again, the inspector will need to go out on site, but let's say that I'm right in that respect. Again, your position, as expressed in the ES that you've adopted, is that there are trees which qualify as traditional habitat which were grown on dwarf rootstocks.
Well, those trees are significantly larger than most of the other trees that we've discussed across the whole of the section. west of the left-hand red box, for example, much larger than all the pear trees that sit to the east of that box, and then much larger than the trees either side of them. So, no, they do appear to be different. And I think it was a fair assessment made to map them as they have been mapped.
Yeah, just an answer to my question.
Which is what I've given.
No, my question was you were prepared to accept, if I'm right, that these are dwarf rootstocks. You, through the ES, were prepared to accept that trees qualify as traditional orchard, notwithstanding that they're grown on dwarf rootstocks. Yes.
I think the character of the trees suggests that they're semi-vigorous. By looking at them and their size at present, they appear to be semi-vigorous, and that's why they've been mapped as such. It's a judgment call made on the ground. No one can look into the ground and see what rootstock there is actually present. The judgment will have been made on the basis of the spacing of the trees and their size.
Okay, so fine. Again, answer my question. If I'm right that these are dwarf rootstocks, then you would accept that trees which are planted on dwarf rootstocks can qualify as traditional habitat?
No, as I think I've made clear, because these trees appear visibly to be on semi-vigorous rootstocks, and no one can dig them up and start, well, we're not going to go to the ground digging them up and start genetically testing what rootstock is present, because they appear visibly to be semi-vigorous rootstock. That's why they've been mapped as traditional orchard habitat. Okay,
you referred to this, the inspectors will have to go on site and take their own view. They'll have to hear evidence from Mr. Woodfield and Ms. Gaisley and reach their own view. But you also referred to the size of the trees. Now, that wasn't something that you've ever referred to before, but is it right to say that you have taken into account the size of the trees within the red box in deciding whether they fall within the JNCC definition of traditional habitat?
Yeah, I had the time last Friday to look at the diameters of trees, measure their trunk diameters whilst I was on site.
Sorry, so just give me a clear answer to my question then.
Yeah, I've been able to consider the size of the trees whilst walking through Cone Orchard.
Yeah, so you've taken the size of the trees into account in deciding whether they qualify as traditional orchard habitat?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And again, that presumably is the exercise of a professional judgment on your part, because there's nothing in the UK HAP definition that you've referred to which refers to size of tree.
No, there's descriptions in terms of context. It talks about larger trees with open canopies. It's that similarity to wood pasture and parkland character as well that we draw upon.
Yeah, again, so you're exercising a professional judgment by reference to the context provided of the description rather than adhering rigidly to what the UK HAP definition says within the JNCC document. That's right, isn't it?
So the UK HAP definition obviously provides all the criteria that need to be met, and then the descriptions above help to inform that definition. Yeah.
I think I put it in very similar, if not identical terms to you earlier, Mr. Whitby, so I'm grateful for that confirmation. Now, let's say for the sake of argument, Mr. Whitby, that you stand and you look at all of those areas of the orchard which you say aren't a traditional orchard, but if it's right that this doesn't qualify as traditional orchard, you are forced into a position of essentially having to ignore the presence of orchard trees and the fact that this is an orchard in deciding what categorisation to give this habitat in the BNG assessment, aren't you?
Well, no, because they're captured as individual rural trees.
Yeah, but if we're looking at an orchard in which fruit trees are planted clearly as part of an orchard, and there are descriptions of orchards in the BNG assessment, you're forced into a situation in which you're having to identify the land as grassland with individual trees in it rather than as an orchard, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think I said it was a sympathetic approach taken that this shouldn't be mapped as intensive orchard. That would appear to be very unfair to Coton Orchard as a site, and that it's therefore gone on the route of mapping it as grassland with individual trees.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any sensible suggestion from any, well, apart from you in your evidence, I suppose, but that this is intensive orchard. So if you map it as grassland with individual trees, you are essentially disregarding the fact that these are trees planted as part of an orchard, aren't you? In the identification of the habitat, you're ignoring the land use, the management, the nature of the trees, and so on, in terms of the way that you map it for BNG purposes.
No, I don't think that's fair. I think, like I said, the alternative of mapping it as an intensive orchard would be unfair to this site, because that would suggest it's managed in an intensive way. What we have is a habitat that is structurally intensive orchard, managed in a low intensity way.
Okay. Well, as I say, the inspectors will need to go out on site and reach their own judgment, and I think I'm going to leave my questions for you there. I want to move on then to the non-statutory sites and the concerns that were raised by Mr. Woodfield in respect of the evidence in the ES. So if you can please take out CD 11105. So you'll just have to bear with me because my computer's now going on a go slow. Right, sorry, I've got it. So and you were taken to CD 111.5, technical report 5 in respect of ecology, and it's page 89 of the PDF, and you were taken to the table by way of a summary of the position, table TR 511.1. Have you got that?
89, I've got it, yep.
And you made the point that in the absence of mitigation, a significant effect would arise, but that because there is mitigation, the residual effects are non-significant, yeah?
Correct.
In terms of that position, therefore, in order to be satisfied that there isn't going to be a residual effect on any of the given county wildlife sites, you need to be satisfied, and the inspectors need to be satisfied, that the mitigation or compensation which is being provided would be to that particular county wildlife site, don't you?
So it needs to be at least in a local context.
So you would say at least in a local context. So, but if I put the point to you, it would need to be demonstrated that it was compensation or mitigation for that county wildlife site. I mean, it depends what you mean by local context. But what do you mean by local context? Let me ask you that.
Well, okay. So if for example, the scrub habitat on the side of the M11, the designation for that is that it's an area of scrub habitat more than half a hectare in size, comprising more than 4 species. That's the reason it met that designation. That's quite easy to recreate. That's a habitat you could you create anywhere within the limits, and that I understand is created elsewhere within the scheme limits.
Yeah, but when you say in the locality, you're saying as long as that habitat is recreated anywhere within the scheme limits.
Not to say the scheme limits, but it's got to be obviously, it's a county site, so it needs to be obviously within the same county. There's no point putting.
Okay. Well, when you say local context, you say anywhere within the county, then.
But yes, it's a county site. So yeah, but by the definition for recreating a county wildlife site, yes, it would be.
Okay. Now, where in the environmental statement do we see any indication as to where the mitigation or compensation for the losses that are predicted to individual sites will be delivered, what the nature of the delivery will be, what the mitigation will be, what the compensation will be? Where do we see any detail about that?
I think a lot of the specific detail, yes, will come later, but there is an illustration of the location of replacement scrub habitat within the order limits.
Okay, so where do we see that? That's my question. I think you said a lot of the detail will come later. Do you accept, therefore, that there isn't any detail as to where that mitigation and compensation will be provided, or what the nature of it is? Or if you say there is some detail that you want to point us to, where do we find that detail?
Okay, yes, there is detail provided. And it's on the slides that show the habitats created along the scheme, slide 17, I think, if I recall correctly. Might need help navigating here. Okay, so proposed site plans, which is CD 116.04.
They're in a series of sheets, I think, aren't they?
Yes, they are, yes.
Which one are you going to?
I think it's sheet 17, sorry, 1 second. Yes, it is sheet 17. So you can see identified there, Basin 07. And either side of that...
You're just going to have to slow down a bit because
Sorry.
my computer is struggling with the size of these documents. Right. Right. On there. So yeah, so Basin 07
Basin
on the left-hand
07.
side. Yeah, I can see the label, yeah.
You'll see to the east and west of that is the scrub habitat provided within the order limits.
Okay. So yeah, so there's no dispute that there is a proposal to provide scrub habitat, but where do we see any indication as to the extent of the loss and the extent of what's being re-provided, or any indication as to the particular location for the habitat that's lost?
The losses are provided in the biodiversity metric, and the amount provided here is 2.2 hectares, I recall, from the proposed habitat creation set out within that metric.
So you're essentially inviting people to there's nothing in the ES that explicitly links the mitigation that's being proposed with what's shown in this drawing, is there?
I think that the environmental statement simply sets out that there's an ability to mitigate the loss of scrub habitat in that location and provide it within the order limits. And as I've identified, that is what this achieves.
Sure. So again, answer my question. There's nothing within the environmental statement which indicates where the mitigation that's suggested to be identified will be delivered, what its extent will be, what the nature of it will be.
I haven't seen that directly within the environmental statements.
No. Okay.
Stating an exact location for where that scrub habitat would be. I think the environmental statement takes a pretty broad.
Okay. What about hedgerows? There's the Coton Path hedgerow. What do you say?
So
about
if we go one
hedgerows?
slide up, which is sheet 16. And what we're looking at is where the route passes through Coton Path hedge, and a new hedgerow provided just above what you can see is marked up as drainage attenuation geocellular tank. If you look at that white box and move up, you'll see a green line just on the inside of the red line of the order limits.
Yeah, okay. But again, in terms of any linkage between the mitigation that's identified to be required for the habitat loss in the ES, there's nothing to suggest that this hedgerow is being provided by way of mitigation of that habitat that's being lost, is there?
I think that detail is yet to follow. There's a few options here. There could be scope for some degree of hedgerow translocation. So that would be over winter coppicing of the hedge to a low level, digging a deep trench along the proposed new hedgerow section and transferring of the root balls across. We've done that successfully in a few projects previously. You can actually scatter it across the new proposed hedge. Obviously that section is much longer than what's being lost. So you can then incorporate some of the value of the section of hedgerow lost scattered within the new hedgerow that you're creating.
Yeah, but doesn't that reveal the fact that these points have yet to be determined, yet to be decided? So for the ES to take the view that these are likely significant effects which will be mitigated and will be compensated for when there is no detail before the inspectors as to how that will happen is inappropriate.
I think that detail is yet to follow, but I think as I've just demonstrated, it is clearly possible.
Okay. Now, sticking with Coton Path hedgerow, that's designated as a county wildlife site by reference to two rare species, and it was suggested in the ES that there would be no impact because those species were not identified. That if you turn to PDF page 56 of the same of CD 11105 Technical Report 5. PDF 56 at internal 52, and there's paragraph 6.2.12.
Yep, I have 6.2.12. Yes.
And we see 6.2.12 reference to Coton Path hedgerow, and the final sentence: no rare or notable plant species were present within this area that is expected to be lost to the scheme. And what are those plant species?
As I recall, it's yellow vetchling and smooth tear.
And what surveys or what was done to search for those species? They're not named in the ES, obviously, but on what basis is it said that those species were present in the area or were not present in the area?
I think that's captured.
Just for you answer, just give us the name of the species again.
Yellow vetchling.
Yellow vetchling.
And smooth tear.
Smooth
tear. T-A-R-E.
Thank you.
There was a botanical assessment undertaken, which is obviously included accompanying the environmental statement. I understand that they undertook surveys through July, which is an optimum period for botanical assessment, and that those species weren't found in the location, not just of the impact, but in fact across, understand, any section of Coton Path hedgerow that they looked at. Looking at the citation, the last time that they were identified in that location was quite a few years ago, and it was actually their location is identified in the text of the citation, and it's further along the hedgerow. It's around the corner along the dogleg. You can see if we want to go back to it, but it's around the dogleg to the west.
Okay, none of that information is in the environmental statement, though, is it?
Like I said, I think the environmental statement provides a very broad, high-level assessment, and then obviously you've got the technical reports supporting it. So I think you'd have to dive into those.
So just an answer to my question, you're saying your position is that it's not in the environmental statement, or it is in the environmental statement. My question was that this information that you've just given orally to the inspectors is not within the environmental statement, is it?
So it's not in the environmental statement text, and the environment statement relies on the technical document supporting it.
Okay. Well. Okay. Well, which technical document are you referring to, Mr. Whitby?
So the Botanical Survey Report, TR 5.4.
Okay.
CD 11105.
So there's a full species list provided based on the NVCs undertaken along the route. They're provided tables TR 5441.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking for reference to yellow vetchling or the other species in the county wildlife site, identified as a species of interest by reference to the county wildlife site, and an indication that that was searched for and found not to be present. I'd understood that's what you said was in the technical report, that information.
So the technical report covers botanical surveys undertaken along the route, and meadow vetchling wasn't identified or smooth tear identified during those botanical assessments.
So where do we see that recorded in the survey? I'd understood that that's what you were saying, that the survey showed that those surveying were cognizant of the species that were recorded. They looked for them, they didn't find them. Where do we see that recorded in this report?
So, 1 second. Yeah, I'm trying to find a figure showing the full extent of the relating to the table, but admittedly I can't find that.
Yeah, I mean we have look, Mr. Woodfield has read these documents, so I mean, is it right then that on the basis of what you've been able to find, there is no information in this survey report in respect to those matters?
It's detailed in the ES that an assessment was undertaken of the hedgerow and those species weren't found. And no, my mistake, it's not covered within this, specifically with this document.
Yeah, okay. But neither of the species that we're referring to, I think, are hedgerow species, so they wouldn't be found within the hedge.
But they're part of the hedgerow citation.
Yeah, they are. But you said that a survey of the hedgerow was undertaken and they weren't found, but you wouldn't expect to find them in the hedgerow. That goes to the point of what surveys were undertaken, what the surveyors were looking for, and whether they would have found them or not.
No, you would have. Within the hedgerow citation, that's because they've been found at the hedge base. The hedgerow isn't. They haven't protected the hedgerow because they found two species that aren't found at the base of a hedgerow. They've identified those two species at the base of the hedge, and they've designated the hedgerow as a whole based on the presence of those two species.
Yeah, okay. I understand. So you accept they're not hedgerow species. They wouldn't be within the hedge itself. You wouldn't expect them to find them within the hedge itself.
Well, they have been found within the hedge, and that's why the hedgerow is designated.
Well, I understand they'd be found in the field margin adjacent to the hedge, essentially. They wouldn't be found. They're not hedgerow species as defined. So if you were searching the hedge for them, you wouldn't find them.
That's not to say you won't find them at the base of a hedgerow.
Okay.
And if the point is these are arable species and therefore they're not found at the base of a hedgerow, I'm not sure why we're worried about losing a section of this hedgerow.
Well, the point is that this site has been identified for these two rare species. You say that a survey's been undertaken by reference to the two species for which this site has been designated, and they weren't found. But there's no detail in the ES or the report, which you've accepted, as to what surveys were undertaken, what species the surveyors were looking for, where they were looking for them, or anything of that nature, to understand whether the assertion in the ES that these species weren't present is actually correct or not? That's right, isn't it, Mr.
Well,
Whitby?
what I would say is that you don't undertake a botanical survey only looking for particular botanical species. You capture all information in front of you. So if they're surveying that hedgerow as part of their assessment, and we do know they have surveyed that hedgerow in order to record its condition, etc., and as part of the baseline, that yes, they would have recorded yellow vetchling, they would have recorded smooth tear had they come across it under the process of doing that assessment.
Just back to my question, Mr. Whitby, I'm going to ask it again because that wasn't an answer to my question. None of the detail of what the surveyors were looking for, what they had in mind, where they surveyed, so on and so forth, none of that detail is recorded in the ES or in the technical report, and so there's no information in either of those documents to substantiate the position, the assertion in the ES, that no rare species were identified.
I can't point you directly to the specific detail of what sections of that hedgerow or the length of that hedgerow that has been subject to a detailed assessment. Admittedly, I've come into this in the last 2.5 weeks, but
Yeah. I want to move on to the BNG assessment and deal with the issue of tree loss. Mr. Woodfield, having reviewed the applicant's BNG assessment, identified that individual trees weren't included in the calculation. And Mr. Ellis and yourself accept that that's correct and that individual trees will need to be mapped for the purpose of the assessment. Yeah. Now, you suggested in your note for the first time that there was, as it were, a methodological issue because the assessment was carried out in accordance with a previous version of the guidance, version 3.1 or the metric. Is that right?
so the metric 3.1 doesn't allow you to capture individual rural trees.
Yeah. And so your position is that the metric that was submitted was carried out in accordance with that version of the metric, hence and that's the reason why trees weren't included.
Now, the baseline survey has been undertaken because it was undertaken before the statutory metric was produced. The baseline survey was undertaken to inform the metric 3.1, which is the most current available at the time.
Yeah.
The metric has then obviously since evolved through 4 and then obviously through to the statutory metric. And they've taken their data and transferred it across to the metric, the statutory metric. And what they can't do, obviously, is go and capture data they don't have. So there does need to be an exercise to go back out to capture tree data.
Okay. Can you take up, please, the technical report, so the biodiversity statement and biodiversity net gain assessment, which is CD 11105, technical report 5, appendix TR57. Sorry, that's a very long reference.
Yes, I have that.
Just wait for the inspectors to open that up. And if you can turn within that, please, to paragraph 3.1.2. And on page 5 and 3.1.3.
So 3.1.2 did you say?
Yeah,
You also say page 5.
which is on PDF page 5. We've got one in the document, yeah. And we see what's said to have been done. Since 12th of February, this is the second sentence of 3.1.2, since 12th of February 2024, the statutory metric has been metric 4, yeah, and what it said there, the BNG assessment for the scheme has been updated to align with the statutory metric. So the metric that was submitted in support of the application was one that was carried out in accordance with metric 4, yeah? That's correct.
I believe so.
and we see that this has been done by transferring the information from the biodiversity metric 3.1 calculation to the statutory metric. And then it says, this information has been cross-referenced with the statutory metric condition assessments and the statutory metric user guide to ensure that the information is consistent with the latest version of these guidance documents, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So what that's saying is that someone has confirmed that the information that's submitted with the statutory metric 4 is consistent with the guidance provided for statutory metric 4. That's the basis on which the BNG assessment was submitted as part of the application.
Just to clarify, there's a statutory metric there's a metric 4.0 produced by DEFRA, and there's the statutory metric. They're two separate things.
Yeah, okay. Putting aside that, dealing with metric 4.
Dealing with metric 4.0.
Yeah. What's said is that the information was updated to ensure consistency with metric 4, yeah? That's what we see in the final sentence per paragraph 3.1.2.
Yes.
Yeah? But in fact, I think what you've said is that, in fact, that's wrong because the information wasn't updated for the purpose of the metric to ensure that individual tree loss was accounted for as required by the metric.
So I think what I said was that at the time the data was gathered, there was no way to map individual rural trees within a metric. That's why that data wasn't captured at an early stage, and that's why it's still required.
Yeah, okay, but that's not what the last sentence of paragraph 3.1.2 says, which is that the information is consistent with the latest version of these guidance documents. The information that's submitted is not consistent because it doesn't account for individual tree loss.
It can be consistent with the guidance, but it has been cleared that it lacks the data, and that the data still needs certain data still needs to be captured.
Where do we see any recognition of that particular caveat?
Well, it's in Mr. Ellis's proof and his rebuttal, I believe.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm talking about this document. When the document was produced, do we see any reference to that in this document?
I think perhaps there was an error there in understanding that in the transfer that data that was missing and needed to be picked up. It has been recognised and it has been acknowledged.
Well, look, Mr. Whitney, let me give you the opportunity, because this is a theme which has cropped up elsewhere in other aspects of the evidence. I mean, do you accept that it was a mistake and it was wrong for metric 4 and an assessment based on metric 4 to be submitted which didn't account for individual tree loss?
I think it was a mistake not to identify that when it changed through the metrics, it was lacking that data.
And that's fair. I'm grateful that that's happened. One of the first times it's accepted a mistake's happened, or oral evidence. It's a shame that didn't come out in any of the written evidence until now, but I've noted that. But if you look at paragraph 3.1.3, we see this information uses habitat condition assessment data that was obtained from habitat surveys undertaken in 2021, and then key part of the sentence, an updated validity survey undertaken in June 2024. Now, if someone undertook an updated validity survey in June 2024, they should have picked up what is, with the greatest of respect, a very obvious point, which is that the assessment didn't account for individual tree loss, shouldn't it?
What I don't know, and obviously I'm not party to the inner workings of WSP, is what extent of the habitat they were able to cover and where they were able to access. So it may well be that the validity survey may have had a focus on particular habitats that they wanted to qualify according to condition assessments they needed to update.
Yeah, again, in answer to my question, if you're carrying out a validity survey undertaken in June 2024, you should reasonably have picked up that the metric requires you to record individual tree loss and either recognise that as an omission or corrected the survey to account for that, shouldn't you?
I think subject to, like I said, if they had available access, then yes.
Thank you. That's fair and helpful, Mr. Whitby. Now, you raise a point at paragraph 19 about sorry, I'm jumping around. Mr. Whitby, your note, let's take up your note, and turn to page 19.
Do you mean paragraph 19?
I'm in paragraph 19, page 5. The final sentence, you say most trees would be expected to be classed as small. And I just want to confirm that the plans that were produced by Mr. Woodfield in his appendix DW6, we can go back to them, on pages 124 and 125 of the PDF. In terms of the trees that Mr. Woodfield has calculated in his review of the BNG assessment, he has only captured the medium and large trees.
With the yellow circles, you mean? Yes, so he's identified medium and large trees, yes.
So insofar as his evidence is concerned, it's entirely consistent with what you said should be done, which is to capture in medium and large size tree loss, yeah?
I disagree with the trees mapped, but yes.
Sorry, just what do you mean when you say you disagree with the trees mapped?
Well, I took the time to measure tree circumferences whilst I was on site last Friday, and I captured data across all of the different rows, tried to identify the largest tree within each row to understand whether they would meet the criteria of medium trees, and the majority of those trees didn't meet medium size, which is a size of a trunk diameter between 30 and 60 centimetres.
Well, we're going to be in a difficult position there, Mr. Whitby, because if you're giving evidence in that respect, that's new evidence. I would want to understand and give Mr. Woodfield the opportunity to respond. If you're criticising the data that he's produced, it's only fair that criticism should have been put to Mr. Woodfield, and it wasn't. I don't know what my learned friend wants to say.
No, I don't accept that at all. My learned friend has asked this witness a question about whether he agrees with the plan. This witness has given him his answer. He's perfectly entitled to give him the answer, and he's just given it clearly. Now, my own friend feels he's not able to deal with that, but that's not because of any evidence I've led, or any failure by me not to put a question, because this is about their case and the case that they want to present. And my learned friend's gone there and doesn't like the answer he's got, but that is his problem, not any failure on the part of us to either put the evidence in or to test the evidence. That is entirely a problem of my learned friend's own making. So he's wrong.
I'm not accusing Mr. Henderson of anything. But the point is that if Mr. Whitby is now going to say that the evidence provided by Mr. Woodfield is wrong, it was incumbent on Mr. Henderson to put that point in cross-examination to Mr. Woodfield to enable him to answer the question. It may be an unfortunate consequence of the fact that Mr. Whitby has been instructed late and has only produced his note and his evidence 2 days before he gives evidence. I'm not seeking to blame anyone. I'm not complaining about Mr. Henderson. He doesn't need to be defensive about it. But it's not fair for Mr. Whitby now to raise these points and for Mr. Woodfield not being had the opportunity to respond to it.
Hang on. So, but this is about Mr. Whitby measuring some trees when he did his survey.
Well, Mr. Woodfield has produced evidence in respect of what he says the tree loss is and should have been in the assessment.
But if I understand it, the dispute here is between the interpretation of Mr. Whitby and Mr. Woodfield on what is a medium-sized tree.
Well, I don't know precisely why Mr. Woodfield and why Mr. Whitby says that the results of his survey are different to the results of Mr. Woodfield's survey.
Well,
it's not unclear, but
I think what I really want to hear is sort of where you're going in terms of testing this. I'm not convinced that Mr. Whitby, having measured some trees as part of his survey, is new evidence. He's just saying that he disagrees with Mr. Woodfield's plan in terms of the...
Yeah.
Mr. Woodfield's plan identifies existing large rural trees and existing medium rural trees. So, as I understand it, so, Mr. Whitby's just saying he disagrees with that, and the reason he disagrees with it is because
I don't have any problem with Mr. Whitby giving an answer to my question. That's not the issue. The issue is that if the applicant is going to call into question the accuracy or the veracity of Mr. Woodfield's evidence as he's presented, that should have been done, so in a way to give Mr. Woodfield an opportunity to respond to any difference of opinion, any criticism, whatever it might be, whatever the basis of Mr. Woodfield's, Mr. Whitby's position is, and that's not possible.
So
Well-
you're saying that should have been raised when Mr. Woodfield was under cross-examination?
Well, yes, or if not before, but yes, at the very least, the point put to Mr. Woodfield that his.
I hear what you're saying. I think what's going to be most helpful with Mr. Clegg is just to carry on with your questions, and let's see where that goes. Okay.
I'm going to put that to one side. I like you to assume, for the purpose of the evidence before the inquiry, is that set out in Appendix DW6 and the drawings that we see there. Yeah. So the trees that are shown as existing medium and large rural trees, and what Mr. Woodfield has done is then update the metric that was submitted by GCP. Have you seen that evidence?
Yes, this is DW7 and 8, is this, I think?
Yeah. So if we look at we need to sort of compare the two assessments, and we see at DW7 the GCP assessment, which records area habitat unit.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the reference.
So it's DW7, page 127 of the PDF. I think you're there, are you, Mr. Whitby?
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
So we can see the sort of most important figures.
Which page of DW7 are you on?
It's the first page. It's the first page.
First page,
And we can see the first red box, area habitat units, minus 13%. And we can see 3 boxes above that, the area habitat units lost minus 20 units. Yeah,
Yes.
that's Mr. Woodfield's extrapolation for this section of the route and the habitat loss.
I do take issue having looked into this figure. It says that it's an extrapolation and that it's uncorrected.
Yeah.
But when I look into the data, and if we just scroll down one page, so it sets out the habitat types and it sets out the areas of each habitat. If it is indeed an uncorrected extrapolation of the metric provided by WSP, it actually gives different habitat areas and different habitat conditions compared to those provided by WSP. So it can't be an uncorrected version of it. For example, you'll have seen in Mr. Ellis's evidence that he states the traditional orchard habitat area within the order limits is 0.42 hectares. In this figure, it's cited as 0.5183. But further, it's actually split out in WSP's metric, roughly 50-50 in traditional orchard habitat in moderate condition and traditional orchard habitat in poor condition, whereas here it's provided as a little over half a hectare and all of it in moderate condition. So it's not an extrapolation of their data. It's different data entirely. So I'm not sure, firstly, the method of extrapolation, because WSP weren't asked to provide their habitat polygons. So there's no way of knowing how they come up with these numbers, which obviously are incorrect, in order to come up with this figure. There's others as well. The lowland mixed deciduous woodland figure is given as 2.32 hectares, whereas you'll see in Mr. Ellis's evidence and indeed within the metric, it's actually about 1.8 hectares of lowland mixed deciduous woodland. So that's been inflated. In the WSP metric, it's also set out into good, moderate and poor condition habitat, where it's been homogenised into all moderate condition here. So I don't think that this is at all a fair extrapolation of their data, and I think it should be disregarded.
Okay, again, Mr. Whitby says those are points that simply weren't put to Mr. Woodfield. They're not an answer to my question, Mr. Whitby.
Well, sir, the commentary is unacceptable, because our point on this is you take his number at face value and we deal with it anyway. So it's not fair to say that these weren't put, because we dealt with it on the basis that if there's this shortfall, we're going to deal with it even on those numbers. And I put all those questions on the basis that even if his figure was right. But if my learned friend wants to probe those figures with this witness is entitled to say, well, I just don't agree with them. That doesn't mean there's any failure by us to put the point to Mr. Woodfield. We didn't need to.
Well, there's been a complication, hasn't there, because there's been a change in witness.
But
and these are the views of Mr. Whitby today.
Yeah.
I think it will help Mr. Underwood and myself if we continue the exchange between
well,
Mr. Parker
I'm grateful, sir, but the commentary is
Mr.
unfair.
Whitby.
The commentary is unfair. It's been said a number of times now. He just needs to put the question and leave the commentary for his submissions. It's unfair.
With respect, Mr. Henson, the answer that I got was not an answer to my question. The question that I put to Mr. Whitby, and I'll again remind you, Mr. Whitby, the purpose of you being here is to answer my questions. It was simply to confirm what you could see on the page. Mr. Whitby took that as an invitation to give all sorts of views about Mr. Woodfield's methodology. And I will say, Mr. Woodfield gave evidence about how he had extrapolated all of these figures, and I don't accept what my learned friend says, that if criticism is to be made of Mr. Woodfield in the way that that's done, that should have been put to Mr. Woodfield. But
I think as Mr. Clegg said, can we focus on asking Mr. Whitby the question?
So, Mr. Whitby, just focus on the question, yeah? So you can see here the figures that Mr. Woodfield has produced as part of his assessment, yeah?
I can see them, yes.
And the most important figure, go back to my question, is the figure of the 13.33% and the total area of habitat units lost. Yeah, those are the sort of key figures for understanding what you would need to, what the effect is and what you'd need to deliver by way of a gain.
I understand that, and I think I've obviously given my answer of why I don't take those figures.
Yeah, but with respect, Mr. Whitby, you weren't asked for your opinion in respect to those figures.
If you just want me to say that I can see those numbers, I can see those numbers.
Yeah, I'm grateful. So yeah, just focus on the questions, and we'll be able to move forward. And then if you want to understand a comparison that was undertaken by Mr. Woodfield, you have to move forward to Appendix DW8. Yeah.
Yes.
And we can see there the total net change in terms of the percentage is minus 27, and the total number of area habitat units lost is 48. Yeah, so a very significant difference if one accounts for individual tree loss, as Mr. Woodfield has done. Yeah,
that is, as like I said, as Mr. Woodfield has mapped it. As I've said, tree loss, of course, is factored according to tree sizes. So we obviously disagree on the size of those trees, small, medium, or
again,
large.
Mr. Whitby, I'm going to interrupt you because you need to focus on the questions, otherwise I'm going to have to keep raising the concern that none of your criticisms were put to Mr. Woodfield. My question was based on an increase of minus 20 to minus 48. That is, on any view, a significant increase, isn't it? That was my question.
I can see that's a significant increase. I think it's appropriate for me to caveat it based on what I've stated, which is that he might have identified a significant increase, and I disagree with how that increase has been presented.
Okay, again,
with the values.
All points as which should have been weren't put to Mr. Woodfield. It's unfair for them to be made in this way. But Mr. Whitby has now answered my question.
Mr. Cameron?
Mr. Henderson has made the point that this commentary is inappropriate. It is. It's also utterly, you may think, utterly pointless to ask a witness, well, what are the figures on the page, and on the basis of the figures on the page, what's the answer, without letting him say, yes, as a matter of, I can read the page, but I don't agree with the basis on which those figures are arrived at. That witness must be allowed to say that. And it's completely improper to try and stop him from doing so.
It's not improper when none of these criticisms were put to the witness.
Yes, but the witness is entitled to give his professional view about the figures, Mr. Parker.
So that's fine. They're not answers to my questions. They're not a caveat of the answer that of the answer that's given by way of response to the question. They're a commentary on in respect of a different issue that isn't the subject of my question. I'm not asking Mr. Whitby to give his professional opinion on the veracity of the figures. I'm asking him to assume the figures and give his professional opinion as to whether the differences are significant or not. That doesn't require, frankly, any commentary as to the accuracy or veracity of the figures.
I mean, what is helpful is if a witness can give an answer first and then provide any sort of explanation or caveat to their answer. I think that's reasonable. I think probably the message is if you ask the question again, Mr. Whitby, if you could answer, yes or no, if everyone, then provide any explanation to your answer. Obviously, it's perhaps unhelpful to go off and sort of anticipate where it's going, but I don't think Mr. Whitby provided an explanation for his answer. His own acceptable, because at the end of the day, as you know, Mr. Parker, me and Mr. Clegg need to hear this evidence, because but between you and the applicant, this is how it's being tested. So if you just carry on, and let's proceed on that basis.
Well, the question was the increase shown in those documents significant? Mr. Whitby said yes. So I don't need to ask that question again. He said it was significant.
Let's just double check to make sure that is what Mr. Whitby said.
I can confirm a difference of minus 20 to minus 48 is a difference of 28 habitat units.
And that's one that you describe, but I think in answer to my previous question, that's one that you would describe as significant, isn't it?
Significance is relative to a scale. Obviously, if this were a small scheme, 28 habitat units is very significant. And in a very large scheme, it's perhaps not.
Okay, so that's a different answer to the answer that you gave to my question before, which was that it was a significant increase, Mr. Whitby. We can go back and look at notes if we need to, but so now your position's changing. You're saying it's not a significant increase, are you?
I'm saying that significance is relevant to scale.
Yeah. But by way of answer to my question, is it significant or is it not significant? That's the question. Okay,
I think I will settle with that. This is a significance of 28 habitat units. I'm not sure what we're relating the significance to, because it's not like there's a signed guidance on significance here of like county, local, or...
Yeah, we're using the word significant in its ordinary English meaning, and I'm asking you to identify whether, as a descriptive term, you would consider a difference of 20 odd habitat units, a doubling of the loss, to be significant or not. If you can't answer that question, that's fine. I thought you had answered it, but if you can't, then we can move on.
It's not a straightforward answer, I think, is what I'd say.
All right. Very good. Paragraph 20, you refer to the availability, as you understand it, of 1,000 units, habitat units at Lower Valley Farm. What is that based on? Is there a document before the inquiry that we can look at to understand what are the available habitat units?
That is as advertised by Bidwells, who I understand manage the site.
Well, but sorry, just again answer to my question. Is there a document before the inquiry that we can look at to understand what?
I don't believe there's anything submitted detailing Lower Valley Farm as a description, no.
Because I think you explained that it's a 140 hectare site. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
That's right. And now, as I understand it from Mr. Woodfield, the maximum uplift that one could achieve in habitat terms would be 6.4 units per hectare if you were to convert pre-existing poor quality habitat into other neutral grassland. So that by combining those two and performing some simple maths, there's less than 1,000 units available rather than more than 1,000 units available.
It's biodiversity units they've stated, so I'm going to assume that they've combined hedgerow units and habitat units together is the total that they're available to sell.
So that doesn't... Okay. So again, the figure of 1,000 habitat units, are you satisfied that that's...
Biodiversity units, it states.
Biodiversity. Are you satisfied that that's accurate? And in view of the evidence that I've put to you...
Sorry, I could...
Are you satisfied that 1,000 unit claim is still accurate in view of the calculation that I've performed with you?
I mean, I haven't seen a baseline assessment for this site. I haven't seen their metric and their projected habitat mapping, etc. So I can't give detailed commentary on what they've stated they're able to deliver. But like I said, I think where they've stated they can deliver more than 1,000 biodiversity units, that's a combination of habitat, likely a combination of habitat and hedgerow units together.
Okay. And in terms of the consequences of one needing to deliver a greater amount of biodiversity net gain than one had previously accounted for. There's obviously a question of availability, and you've referred to Lower Valley Farm, but there's also a cost associated with the delivery of additional units, isn't there?
There is, yes. Yeah.
I mean, Mr. Woodfield suggested that conservatively you were looking at some £25,000 per unit. Is that a fair?
It depends on the type of unit
Yeah.
that you're trying to offset. £25,000 for other neutral grassland might be hitting the right sort of ballpark for this area. It's demand and supply
Yeah.
that obviously affects cost.
Yeah. And if you were to need to deliver traditional orchard, obviously the cost of that is going to be higher.
Traditional orchard habitat is likely to cost more. I think I've seen prices at around sort of £50,000. £39,000 for traditional orchard habitat. Sorry for offsetting. So yes, it would cost a bit more.
Yeah, but if we're looking at an increase by reference to the assessment of 28 additional units, that in and of itself is obviously a significant additional cost to the project, which thus far hasn't been accounted for. Well, you probably can't speak to whether it's been accounted for, but in any event, that is a significant sum of money. You can do the maths, but we're looking at between an extra £500,000 and £1 million solely by reference to this failure to account for individual tree loss, aren't we, Mr. Whitby?
So again, I'm going to say that yes, that's right, but my caveat would be that we don't agree on the value of the tree losses. That needs to be that assessment needs to be undertaken. And yes, I understand that there may well be, once all of those individual trees have been mapped, a reasonable increase in habitat units required, but there is a resource available to obtain those units.
Now, watercourse units specifically, you referred to evidence in respect of the likely losses, and you said half a unit, but you would accept there's some uncertainty in respect of the likely uplift required in terms of watercourse units.
That's all going to
fair?
be subject to detailed design.
Sure.
So once we know exactly the nature of every bridge and crossing, etc., then yes, the values are going to change.
But it could be higher than 0.5 units.
It could, but it's unlikely to be very significantly higher, because we're talking about whether a bridge needs to be 1 metre wide or not. You know, it's not going to be a significant increase.
And it's right that as matters stand, firstly, Lower Valley Farm is not going to be able to deliver watercourse units, is there?
Lower Valley Farm can't now, and I think we've already talked through at least two other options for purchasing watercourse units.
Yeah. So in terms of the council's own plans for watercourse units, the scheme that you referred to is Sheep's Green, which I think is a scheme which is now committed but isn't, as it were, in existence. Is that right?
Yes, it's yet to be established.
And it's envisaged to have 2.1 units.
2.21.
2.21 units, so important to be precise. 2.21 units. And you were asked a question by Mr. Clegg, well, what other schemes might meet or might require the units that are being provided? And I think you confirmed that you don't know what other demand there might be for those watercourse units. That's right, isn't it?
I can't look into the future and see what other schemes might well come forward. Of course, there may be other planning applications that do, and that creates competition for those biodiversity resources.
And it's entirely possible, if not likely, that there are going to be other schemes in the vicinity of Sheep's Green which are going to give rise to demand for watercourse units. That's right, isn't it?
I would assume that's entirely possible, and I think, as I stated, there's other resources available. There's obviously the biodiversity gain sites registered to fall back to other sites that are selling watercourse units, and it's a case, obviously, of supply meeting demand. At the moment, obviously, this scheme isn't consented, so no one's going to start putting an awful lot of time and effort and money into creating watercourse units if they don't know there's the security of someone being there ready to purchase those units. But once that demand is created, supply naturally follows, and that's something that I see regularly with our work.
Yeah, well, again, uncertainty as to if for some reason the demand at Sheep's Green is taken up by some other scheme, or the Sheep's Green can't meet the entirety of the demand, there is uncertainty at the very least as to where those watercourse units will be delivered, isn't there, Mr. Whitby?
I mean, nothing is guaranteed until obviously there's a legal agreement for any units. But as I understand it, they would have control over the Sheep's Green watercourse units resource, and therefore they could secure it for this scheme.
And in terms of the cost of watercourse units, those units are very much more expensive than other types of habitat unit, aren't they? So there is an increased cost implication associated with the need for those units. That's
they
right,
are more
isn't it?
expensive, yes.
And then final topic then, dealing with what you say at paragraph 22 of your note. You say final sentence, it would be incorrect, for example, to therefore suggest that a loss in hedgerow units within this scheme illustrates a net loss in foraging habitat value for bats. And in your evidence in chief, you referred to some slides that will come on and have a look at in due course. And you made clear that where habitat is being provided by way of compensation for losses, and that is habitat which cannot contribute towards the delivery of a biodiversity net gain, yeah?
It can't contribute to your 10%. So if you've got a development that results in a net loss,
yeah,
you can include your compensation for protected species, and bear in mind this relates to EPS licensing. You can include your requirements to comply with EPS licensing requirements to bring you up to no net loss, but your 10% above that then has to be, it cannot factor in that EPS license requirement.
Yeah, so if you can take up the proof of evidence of misreason, please.
Yep.
And turn to paragraph 6.2.16.
6.2.16, yes.
Yeah. So on PDF page 16, 6.2.16, it is Ms. Reason's evidence, and we see here reference to at the April meeting, Natural England was shown pre- and post-construction barber-style foraging availability. Now that, as I understand it, the slides that you were taken to in examination in chief, we can go back to those if we need to, based on UK HABs categories assigned for the BNG assessment, and that there be no net loss of bat foraging habitat as a result of the scheme following implementation of BNG. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what, as I understand Ms. Reason is saying, is that she is relying on what is shown in the BNG assessment by way of the delivery of habitat in support of the BNG by way of compensation for the loss of bat foraging habitat, yeah?
Yeah, I think with Barbastels and with the situation we have with this development, you're looking at a core sustenance zone of 6 kilometres. I think that was agreed previously. We're looking at an area of 81 hectares, and the representation of this site in the context of a 6 hectare radius. 6 hectare radius gives you 13,100 hectares. So we're less than 1% of the total core sustenance zone area that's affected. So this reason hasn't probably got to go into the detail of designing bespoke compensation, because most of the footprint of this development is arable habitat of very low value to Barbastel bats, and it's developed land sealed surface. There's quite a restricted area of habitat within the order limits that actually has value for Barbastels. But what she's illustrated in Natural England is that their concerns can be allayed by the fact that the scheme's already designed in an awful lot of replacement of habitat that does have greater value for Barbastels. It's a consequence of what they're doing.
Yeah, so Mr. Whitby, just my first question was just to make sure we were in the same position in terms of our understanding of what Ms. Reason was saying. So that's fine. But what Ms. Reason has done, therefore, is relied upon the delivery of habitat as part of the BNG gain in order to be satisfied that there will be compensation available for commuting and for foraging habitat for the bats within the order scheme, hasn't she? She's done precisely the thing which you say shouldn't do.
This scheme perhaps hasn't been design-led in all of its landscaping, etc., specifically for Barbastel bats. And I think that what Ms. Reason has done is look at what has been designed into the scheme. Does it fit with what she needs? Yes, it does, and it's quite easy that it's simple that it would do, because you've got a scheme that's mostly, like I said, develops along habitats of very, very low value for Barbastel bats. An order of 68% of it is developed land sealed surface and arable habitat, and it's being replaced, of course, by an awful lot of other neutral grass and planting, mixed scrub we looked at, new woodland planting, hedgerows we've looked at. So it is being replaced by habitats that are of greater value for Barbastel bats anyway than the existing baseline. I think that's what she's illustrated to them.
Yeah, so just an answer to my question.
Which is like I said, is that she hasn't had to put a detailed sort of design of habitats specifically for Barbastel bats, because it's quite naturally already led to what she needs, which is creation of habitats of greater value for Barbastel bats anyway.
No. Ms. Reason's position is that there is required to be compensation in terms of commuting and foraging for bats. Yeah?
Yeah.
And she has identified in this paragraph that the habitat that she is relying on to deliver that compensation is habitat which is identified in the BNG assessment as being
which is a marriage of convenience.
That habitat which will deliver the BNG gain. So come back to my question. She is doing the precise thing which you say shouldn't be done, which is essentially to double count habitat which is being delivered as part of a BNG net gain and delivering or said to deliver compensation for habitat lost for Barbastels, isn't she?
This isn't double counting. This isn't double counting. Like I said, this is a marriage of convenience. It's that in landscaping the site and creating biodiversity net gain uplift, there's also been the creation of habitats of greater value for Barbastel bats. But what isn't being done here, and wouldn't be an issue because this isn't subject to an EPS license, is design of habitats for Barbastel bats and a double counting Barbastel bat habitat within the biodiversity metric, or using it inappropriately to illustrate an increase in habitat creation.
Okay. Well, I think it's clear. Okay, I'm not going to ask the question again. I've put the point to you. And insofar as Ms. Reason is relying on the delivery of habitat as part of the biodiversity net gain assessment, she has in her evidence, she doesn't account for the possibility that that habitat will need to be delivered in part off-site, has she? That's the concern that arises in respect to the BNG assessment.
Well, I think that's what we looked at, that figure where she makes her comparison purely on habitat changes within the order limits. So she doesn't rely on any habitat creation off-site. No.
No. Is there anything else? Mr. Whitby, thank you. Those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Casey, I understand you want to ask some questions of Mr. Whitby as well. Oh, yes, please.
It looks like it's already on. Yes. Hello. You, Mr. Whitby, you visited last Friday, so, excluding that visit, is it correct to say that although you're an expert ecologist, you did not personally undertake any of the ecological surveys at Coton Orchard?
That's correct.
So is it also fair to say that ecological surveys provide only a snapshot in time of the species present, their results being necessarily limited to the particular days or seasons when surveyors are on site?
That's correct.
Would you accept that even without holding formal ecological credentials, local recorders and residents, by virtue of their year-round presence and observation, may identify species not recorded during the applicant's ecological surveys or listed in its environmental impact assessments?
Yeah, citizen science is quite a complex one to tackle. It gives you the opportunity to obviously have an awful lot more data, but it doesn't account for the possibility of error. There's a bias ingrained with people when they go out, say, bird watching or looking for a rare butterfly or something that is difficult to identify, that they naturally want to have identified what they're looking for or the rarest thing that they might want to find. And so, for example, trying to distinguish between different fritillary butterflies, people get excited thinking that they've got, say, pearl-bordered fritillary when actually they haven't. It's just ingrained into them. They want to have found the rarest thing. So citizen science can be useful, but it has to be kind of taken in that context that there may be a lack of accuracy.
So would it surprise you, say, when Professor Jonathan Shanklin took a walk through the meadows, he recorded 111 species of 111 botanical species in the orchard?
No, I'd take that at his word.
Can you tell the inquiry how many survey days the applicant carried out, for example, terrestrial invertebrates across a full year, covering all seasonal phases of the invertebrate life cycle?
I can't tell you that off the top of my head. I've had a look at the invertebrate survey report and noted the number of species that I identified, including some that are nationally scarce.
Yeah. So, not knowing the exact figure, as you just said, as you just agreed, the terrestrial invertebrate surveys still recorded an important invertebrate assemblage, including 14 nationally scarce species.
That's, I think, been captured in the ES, and it does state that that should be given county significance.
Yeah, so the species recorded in the IA include nationally scarce and Section 41 priority species. So under national policy, those designations identify species of national importance for conservation. Have I got that right?
Like I said, I think it gave the assemblage of invertebrates identified county significance, but there are obviously nationally scarce species.
Yeah, so the species themselves are nationally scarce, rare, and Section 41 priority. So if such findings were made with only a limited temporal sample, the likelihood is that the site's true diversity might still be higher?
Yeah, it's the case with surveys that you could be entirely exhaustive. You could undertake surveys obviously every day of the year necessarily. Of course, the more you survey, the more you find. But that is why, of course, we set ourselves parameters for what we consider to be an appropriate level of assessment.
Fair enough. There's been quite a lot of debate today about the percentage of Coton Orchard that qualifies as traditional orchard, but you don't dispute that some part of it at least is traditional habitat.
Absolutely, yeah.
The applicant is seeking powers to construct what is in effect a 3-lane transport corridor directly through the middle of it.
I understand the busway needs to pass through traditional orchard habitat, yes.
Would it be fair to say that you've got no dispute, or the applicant's got no dispute, that Coton Orchard contains multiple veteran trees?
These are the Bramleys, I think, isn't it? that I had a look at. Yes, they're nice old trees.
And is it correct that the applicant relies entirely on Mr. Older's evidence that there will be no loss or deterioration of veteran trees, these irreplaceable habitats?
I can't really cover everything that Mr. Alder's given in evidence. I'm only appearing, obviously, in an ecological context, but I have to take your word on that.
So if the inspectors are not convinced by Mr. Alder's claims that all the veteran trees can be moved or protected without loss or deterioration, Mr. Ellis's conclusion of no residual loss has no separate evidential basis, does it?
I can't.
As far as you're aware.
I can't cover Mr. Alder's evidence and what he's stated, but I'm aware of methods of translocating mature trees. I've not been involved in directly. That's a specialism covered by him.
So, in your note, you mentioned most of the orchard's apple trees fall within the small 7.5 to 30 centimetre band. That's simply for the biodiversity metric record size bands, isn't it?
That's correct. So the bands are 7.5 centimetres to 30 for a small tree. Below that, it doesn't qualify as a mappable tree. 30 to 60 centimetres for a medium-sized tree, and above 60 is a large tree.
So that size banding isn't intended to determine whether a tree is veteran or not?
It's not. It's entirely separate.
Yeah. So when assessing veteran status, the focus is usually on features of age and things like hollowing, cavities, deadwood, rather than primarily on how tall or thick a tree happens to be. Would that be fair?
Ms. Gazey, I think you've already established that Mr. Whitby isn't trying to address Mr. Alder's evidence. So can I just check where you're going with these questions?
That the county wildlife site contains a significant number of veteran trees, and that veteran trees are treated differently when you're working out to biodiversity net gain?
Okay, well, if you can continue the questions, what I just want to avoid is you asking, you've established that the applicant's relying on Mr. Alder in terms of the evidence about veteran trees. I just want to make sure that you're not asking Mr. Whitby those questions. So carry on, please.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that the reference to them being small in stature is separate from recording whether they're veteran or not.
Well, just on that point, I mean, whilst Mr. Whitby isn't giving evidence on that, I think he did answer that, didn't you?
I confirmed how we measure trees, yes, through the biodiversity metric, and that the size of a tree confirmed in a biodiversity metric doesn't confirm if it's a veteran tree or not.
Okay, so I'm at risk of repetition again. Would it be fair to say that you've got no dispute that Coton Orchard has met the criteria set out by the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough County Wildlife Site Panel as a county wildlife site?
They have done so, yes.
Specifically in the category traditional orchard?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the citation, but I think yes, for some of its features of traditional orchard habitat.
And consistent with the selection criteria for that category, Coton Orchard contains at least 20% veteran trees.
So we're saying that 20% of the total orchard makeup is veteran trees?
That's one of the selection criteria for a county wildlife site under the traditional orchard category.
I certainly wouldn't agree that 20% of the trees there are veteran trees, because by far the greatest number, also given that density, are small trees.
That's why I was discussing about the size of the tree not necessarily being the indicator of whether it's veteran or not.
Whether or not depending on how they've approached their assessment, if they're looking at the more localised context of traditional orchard at Coton, separate to other parts of the orchard that are more intensive, then that may be how they came up to meet that criteria. But obviously I can't comment. I wasn't part of that panel.
Yeah, well, the applicant was. So would you at least agree that the Cambourne to Cambridge Works order limits run east-west through Coton Orchard?
Sorry, yeah, does it run through Coton Orchard?
East-west.
Yes.
Passing directly across the existing orchard habitat. So County Wildlife Site is physically divided in its north-south ecological connectivity.
Yes, the route passes along the kind of southern extent of the orchard and creates a degree of severance with the habitats to the south.
And there are, by the applicant's own evidence, 29 distinct hedgerows within the scheme boundary, and all but one, hedgerow 10, qualifies habitats of principal importance.
Within the order limits across the whole scheme, yes.
And every one of those hedgerows would be permanently severed or otherwise interrupted by the construction of the busway, wouldn't they?
That's correct.
And necessarily because there'll be a busway in the way, north-south connectivity won't be mitigated for within the order limits.
North-south connectivity, so direct hedgerow connectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah, by severance, yes.
Yeah. And in addition to dividing the county wildlife site into northern and southern fragments, what is in effect the three-lane highway, the scheme would also sever the green corridor linking Madingley Wood SSI to the north with Coton Countryside Reserve to the south, thereby undermining the objectives of the published county, city and district climate and nature recovery strategies in relation to nature connectivity. Would that be fair?
So the busway passes between those two sites, but you want me to qualify, does it create severance to all wildlife between the two?
Because the orchard site to the north, there's connectivity to the SSI, and then to the southern section, we are presently connected to the Coton Country Reserve. So the busway going through the centre of it will separate those two fragments, and therefore the corridor between the north and the south.
So there's a degree of fragmentation created through the construction of any new road, and the degree that creates severance is subject to the wildlife that you're specifically dealing with. That severance is significant for birds, for example, but might be more significant for something pretty immobile like a slow worm, let's say. So it's relevant to the species identified and as set out in the environmental statement.
We've already had quite a lot of discussion about Lower Valley Farm, so I'll try not to repeat myself. But you describe Lower Valley Farm as a blank slate, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so it lies roughly, 8 miles east-southeast of Coton Orchard? Something like that?
Yeah, I think I measured it at 9.5 kilometres southeast of the closest order limits.
Okay, so roughly then. So there's no ecological connectivity between these two sites, no continuous habitat corridor or functional link for dispersal, is there?
Between Coton Orchard and if we were to use Lower Valley Farm as an orchard receptor, Lower Valley Farm is one option. It could be used for creation of traditional orchard habitat, but it doesn't make it the preferred option.
And a blank slate means there's no veteran trees, no deadwood habitat, no existing orchard structure at Lower Valley Farm, is there?
That's correct.
And newly planted trees take many decades to develop veteran characteristics. Hollows, fissures, decaying wood niches used by saproxyllic invertebrates, for example, don't they?
To create veteran trees, yes, you need quite a lot of time. To create a traditional orchard, as set out in the metric, it's 20 years target habitat condition.
So any habitat creation at Lower Valley Farm would not support the same assemblage of species within any meaningful ecological time frame, would it? So it means at least 20 years.
So I think if we're focusing on Lower Valley Farm as the offset for traditional orchard habitats, yes, that could take a long time. But there are other options to the applicant. There's 2 other gain sites identified on the Natural England's Biodiversity Gain Sites Register. One at West Wickham and one at Boxworth, each with the opportunity for the applicant to perhaps offset at those. And there's nationally 40 sites with traditional orchard habitat cited on the Biodiversity Gain Sites Register. There's perhaps also the opportunity for the applicant to utilise other land within their control to look into the creation of orchard habitats. Like I said, I think a lot of this will come once that demand is clear and identified, that the time and the effort and the money will be put behind actually delivering those habitat units.
But many of the specialist invertebrates affected by this scheme, including saproxylid beetles, have very limited dispersal ranges, so often measured in tens or hundreds of metres, not miles. So a site-to-site, be it Low Valley Farm or anywhere else lying miles away, cannot realistically support the same populations or maintain genetic continuity with those now present in the 4 wildlife sites that the scheme disrupts, can it?
I mean, specifically specifically focusing on invertebrates, you've got within the orchard, you've got obviously trees, plums and pears, which all have close equivalents within the countryside, covering things like crabapple, blackthorn and damson, etc. And if you've got specialists which focus on those trees, they will have hop-over opportunities within hedgerows, within woodlands and other habitats with which they can disperse, effectively creating a jump between an orchard that exists and an orchard that is being created. If you look across not just Cambridge but lots of other locations, there are other orchards which are very spread out, and yet you will still find those species within them, even if there's not another orchard within, say, 10 miles, 20 miles, whatever it might be. The question has to be, how do they get there? And obviously they do find a way. It can take time.
So there's been quite a lot of talk today, but I think there's consensus that there's significant adverse effects on important ecological features that will remain at Coton Orchard even after mitigation measures are applied. I think there's agreement there, isn't there?
So I think in the environmental statement it states that, yes.
Yeah. So just so it's clear to me, this is a county-level transport scheme promoted under a local Transport and Works Act order, where county taxpayers are liable for any overspend and future maintenance, would result in a county-scale permanent loss of habitats supporting species of national conservation concern. Have I got that right?
That's I think that's a fair summary.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. On my schedule, I was only expecting questions from CPPF and Coton Orchard. Can I just double check to see if that's remains? I can't see anybody else. I'm just going to. I was going to suggest that actually we break for lunch, and then myself and Mr. Clegg will have some questions for you, Mr. Whitney, before I give the applicant an opportunity to ask any other questions in re-examination. So I'll make it 4 minutes past 1, and we'll resume at 2 o'clock. So thank you.